Hello and welcome back to Midnight Mind. It's good to have you here. Tonight, we're going to explore creativity and imagination, how ideas are born, where inspiration hides, the quiet moments when your mind surprises you with something new. We'll wander through the science of daydreams, the mystery of creative breakthroughs, and the gentle ways your brain builds worlds that don't yet exist. Let tonight's discoveries guide you gently toward rest. You don't need to remember everything. Just let these ideas drift through your mind like clouds across a quiet sky. Some will linger, others will fade, and that's perfectly fine. So settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe deeply. Let your body sink into comfort. And let's begin. Your brain cannot tell the difference between something vividly imagined and something real. When you imagine biting into a lemon, the same neurons fire as if you were actually tasting it. Your sensory cortex lights up. Your mouth might even water. To your brain, imagination is just another form of experience. It is a reminder that the line between what is real and what is imagined is softer than we think. Creativity doesn't happen in one place. It emerges from networks spread across your entire brain, quietly communicating. The left hemisphere handles details and logic. The right hemisphere sees patterns and possibilities. When they work together, ideas flow. It's not one side or the other. It's the conversation between them, whispered across billions of connections. Some of your best ideas arrive when you're doing nothing at all. Scientists call this the default mode network, a web of brain regions that activate during rest and daydreaming. This is when your mind makes unexpected connections, linking memories and concepts that seemed unrelated. Boredom isn't emptiness. It's the quiet space where insights grow. Children are more imaginative than adults, not because they're smarter, but because their prefrontal cortex is still developing. They haven't learned yet what's impossible or impractical. A cardboard box becomes a spaceship. A blanket becomes a fortress. Their imagination roams freely, unfiltered by the rules adults have learned to follow. It's a reminder that creativity needs permission to play. Walking boosts creative thinking by 60%. The simple act of moving, especially outdoors, increases divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple solutions to a problem. The rhythm of your steps, the shifting scenery, the steady flow of oxygen to your brain, all loosen rigid thought. Ideas arrive with each footfall, quietly, without effort. Dreams are where your brain experiments with creativity. During REM sleep, your mind shuffles memories, emotions, and images in strange combinations. This isn't chaos, it's rehearsal. The dreaming brain tests new patterns, explores impossible scenarios, and sometimes stumbles upon solutions your waking mind couldn't find. You are creating, even while you sleep, quietly, in the dark. The color blue enhances creativity. Studies show that exposure to blue tones encourages open-ended thinking and exploration, while red sharpens focus on details. It's not magic, it's association. Blue evokes the sky, the ocean, vast open spaces where the mind feels free to wander. Even your environment whispers to your imagination. Creative people tend to have more diverse life experiences. Travel, learning new skills, meeting people from different cultures. All of these stretch your mind's catalog of patterns and possibilities. Creativity isn't just about having ideas, it's about having material to work with. The more textures your mind has touched, the richer its inner world becomes. Most creative breakthroughs happen during moments of relaxation, not intense focus. The shower, the walk, the moment just before sleep. These are when your mind loosens its grip on a problem and the solution surfaces. Scientists call this incubation. You're not giving up. You're stepping aside so something deeper can emerge. It's a quiet form of trust. Your imagination can change your body. Athletes who vividly imagine practicing a skill show measurable improvements in performance, even without physical practice. Mental rehearsal activates the same motor pathways as real movement. Your muscles remember what your mind imagined. The boundary between thought and body is thinner than we assume. Imagination isn't just mental, it's physical. Children ask around 300 questions a day. Adults ask far fewer. Somewhere along the way, we stop wondering. We learn the answers, or we stop believing new answers exist. But curiosity is the engine of creativity. Every question opens a door. Every why is an invitation. The child's mind isn't naive, it's awake. The ancient Greeks believed creativity came from the Muses, divine beings who whispered inspiration to mortals. It wasn't something you owned, it was something that visited you. Perhaps they understood something we've forgotten, that the best ideas feel like gifts, arriving unbidden, as if from somewhere beyond ourselves. Creativity isn't forced, it's received. Constraints boost creativity. When resources are limited, time, materials, options, the mind becomes more inventive. Too much freedom can paralyze. A blank page is daunting. A single prompt, a single rule, gives the imagination something to push against. Creativity isn't born from abundance. It's born from having just enough to work with. Some people see colors when they hear music, or taste shapes, or feel textures when they see numbers. This is synesthesia, a blending of the senses. For them, the world is richer and stranger. Their brains make connections others don't. It's a reminder that perception is personal. Your imagination is uniquely yours. No two minds experience the world the same way. Laughter activates the same brain regions as creative thinking. When you joke, improvise, or pretend, you're practicing flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives, to see the absurd, to question the obvious. Humor isn't frivolous. It's a cognitive skill. A serious mind isn't always a creative one. Sometimes, play is the doorway. Doodling helps memory and focus. When your hand moves without a goal, your mind stays gently engaged. It's not distraction, it's soft attention. The loops and lines you draw without thinking are your brain's way of staying present while leaving room for deeper thoughts to surface. Even mindless creation has a purpose. Your imagination is more active when you're slightly tired, late at night, or early in the morning, when your prefrontal cortex, your brain's strict editor, is less alert. Unusual ideas slip through. This is why some writers and artists do their best work in the hours when logic loosens its grip. Exhaustion isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's permission to dream. Imagining the future uses the same brain networks as remembering the past. Both require you to construct scenes that don't exist in the present moment. Your mind is a time traveler, constantly building and rebuilding narratives. Memory is imagination pointed backward. Imagination is memory pointed forward. They're two faces of the same quiet process. Children spend more time in imaginative play when they feel safe. Security is the foundation of creativity. When a child knows they're protected, their mind is free to explore. Fear narrows focus. Safety expands it. It's true for adults, too. The more secure you feel, the more willing you are to take creative risks. Trust creates space for imagination. The brain's reward system lights up during creative work. Dopamine, the chemical associated with pleasure and motivation, floods your system when you solve a problem or complete a creative project. This is why creation feels good. Your brain is rewarding you for exploring, for making something new. Creativity isn't just productive, it's deeply satisfying. Silence enhances imagination. In the absence of external noise, your internal world becomes louder. Thoughts that were drowned out by distraction begin to surface. This is why some people find their best ideas in quiet moments, during meditation, in nature, in the stillness before dawn. Silence isn't empty. It's full of potential. Your brain generates images faster than you can describe them. When you imagine a face, a place, or a memory, the visual cortex creates a detailed mental picture in milliseconds. Language struggles to keep up. This is why some experiences feel impossible to put into words. Imagination moves at the speed of neurons. Words move slower, trying to catch up. Creative flow feels timeless. When you're deeply absorbed in creative work, hours can pass without notice. This happens because the prefrontal cortex, which tracks time and self-awareness, becomes less active. You're not distracted. You're fully present, so present that the concept of time dissolves. Flow isn't about working faster. It's about losing track of everything except the work itself. Children create imaginary friends for companionship, but also for problem-solving. These invisible companions help them rehearse social situations, process emotions, and explore different perspectives. It's not escapism. It's practice. The imaginary friend is a safe space to test ideas and feelings. Adults do this too, though we call it something else. We call it thinking things through. Music and creativity are deeply linked. Listening to music activates brain regions involved in emotion, memory, and pattern recognition. It primes the mind for creative thinking. This is why so many people work better with music playing softly in the background. The rhythm and melody create a scaffolding for thoughts to climb. Your most creative ideas often come from combining two unrelated concepts. This is called combinatorial creativity. The aeroplane was inspired by birds. Velcro was inspired by burrs sticking to fabric. The best inventions aren't entirely new. They're old ideas meeting in unexpected ways. Creativity is often a matter of connection, not invention. The brain prunes neural connections as you age. This sounds negative, but it's not. Pruning makes the brain more efficient. It removes pathways you don't use and strengthens the ones you do. This is why expertise develops. But it's also why children seem more imaginative. Their brains haven't pruned yet. Every pathway is still open. Every possibility still feels possible. Daydreaming isn't laziness. It's how your brain consolidates information, solves problems, and rehearses the future. Studies show that people who daydream more tend to score higher on creativity tests. The wandering mind isn't lost. It's exploring. Some of the world's most famous ideas came from dreams. The structure of the benzene molecule, the melody for Yesterday by Paul McCartney, even the plot of Frankenstein, all arrived during sleep. The dreaming mind doesn't follow rules. It experiments freely. Sometimes it stumbles upon something the waking mind couldn't find. Creativity requires both novelty and usefulness. An idea can be wildly original, but if it doesn't solve a problem or communicate something meaningful, it's just randomness. True creativity sits at the intersection of imagination and purpose. It's not enough to think differently. You have to think differently toward something. The act of creating changes your brain. Every time you practice a creative skill, painting, writing, playing an instrument, you strengthen the neural pathways involved. Creativity isn't a fixed trait. It's a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. You are not born creative or uncreative. You become what you practice. Exposure to nature boosts creative problem solving. One study found that spending just 4 days in the wilderness, away from technology, improved creativity scores by 50%. Nature quiets the analytical mind and awakens the intuitive one. The rustle of leaves, the flow of water, the vastness of sky, all of this invites the mind to wander. Children lose interest in drawing around age 10, not because they lose ability, but because they become self-conscious. They start comparing their work to others. They start judging. Creativity doesn't disappear. It gets buried under criticism. The child who stops drawing doesn't lack talent. They lack permission to be imperfect. Your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next. This is how you navigate the world efficiently. But creativity requires breaking predictions. It requires seeing what isn't expected. This is why creative people often seem scattered or unconventional. They're not following the brain's default script. They're writing a new one. The concept of the creative genius is relatively modern. For most of history, art and invention were collaborative, communal efforts. The idea that one person alone creates something from nothing is a myth. Creativity is always built on what came before. It's always influenced by culture, by conversation, by the quiet exchange of ideas across time. Meditation increases activity in brain regions associated with creativity. It quiets the default mode network's self-focused chatter and opens space for new patterns to emerge. You don't meditate to think harder. You meditate to think differently. The stillness creates clarity. The clarity creates insight. Play is not the opposite of work. It's the foundation of it. Every major innovation, every artistic movement, every scientific breakthrough began with someone playing with an idea, exploring it without knowing where it would lead. Play is how we learn. Play is how we discover. Play is how we create. Your imagination can make you healthier. Studies show that visualizing your immune system attacking illness can improve recovery rates. The mind-body connection is real. What you imagine, your body begins to prepare for. Imagination isn't escapism. It's a tool. Creative people tend to be more comfortable with ambiguity. They don't need immediate answers. They can sit with uncertainty, explore multiple possibilities, and tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. This is a skill, not a personality trait. It can be learned. Creativity requires patience with the unknown. The brain's hippocampus, responsible for memory, is also crucial for imagination. To imagine the future, your brain pulls fragments from past experiences and reassembles them into something new. Every imagined scenario is built from the raw material of memory. You cannot imagine what you have never, in some form, experienced. Children are less afraid of failure. They try things without worrying about the outcome. They build towers that fall. They draw pictures that don't look right. They keep going. Adults have learned to fear mistakes. But mistakes are how creativity advances. Every failed attempt teaches you what doesn't work, bringing you closer to what does. Boredom is a gift. When there's nothing to do and nowhere to be, the mind turns inward. It starts generating its own entertainment. This is where imagination thrives. In the absence of external stimulation, internal worlds grow richer. Boredom isn't something to escape. It's something to embrace. The brain uses about 20% of your body's energy, even though it's only 2% of your body weight. Creative thinking uses even more. This is why deep work feels exhausting. You're not imagining the fatigue. Your brain is genuinely burning fuel. Creativity is metabolically expensive. Rest isn't optional. It's necessary. Some languages have words for creative concepts that English doesn't. In Japanese, ma refers to the creative use of negative space. In Arabic, tarab describes the emotional ecstasy music creates. Language shapes how we think about creativity. The words we have limit or expand what we notice. Mirror neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform it. This is how we learn by observation. It's also how art works. When you watch a dancer, your motor cortex activates as if you're dancing too. Imagination isn't just mental, it's embodied. Your whole nervous system participates. Creative work requires both divergent and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking generates many possibilities. Convergent thinking narrows them down to the best one. Most people are stronger in one than the other, but creativity requires both. You need the wild brainstorm and the careful edit, the explosion and the refinement. Time pressure can enhance creativity, but only to a point. A little urgency focuses the mind. Too much triggers stress, which narrows thinking. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. Enough pressure to stay engaged, but not so much that fear takes over. Creativity needs a little tension, but also a lot of safety. Your inner critic has a voice, but it's not always right. That voice telling you your work isn't good enough is often just fear disguised as judgment. Learning to recognize it, to thank it for trying to protect you, and then to keep creating anyway, that's the practice. Creativity isn't about silencing the critic. It's about not letting it decide. Children mix fantasy and reality fluidly. They know the game is pretend, but they commit fully. Adults often hold back, afraid to look foolish. But full commitment is what makes imagination powerful. Half-hearted pretending doesn't convince anyone, not even yourself. Creativity requires belief, even temporary belief, in what you're making. The brain's anterior cingulate cortex helps you notice when something doesn't fit. It flags conflicts, errors, surprises. This is useful for survival, but it's also essential for creativity. Noticing what's wrong, what's missing, what could be better, that's where new ideas begin. Dissatisfaction is the seed of innovation. Some of the greatest creators worked in obscurity for years. Van Gogh sold almost nothing during his lifetime. Emily Dickinson published barely any poems. Kafka asked for his work to be destroyed. Recognition and creativity are not the same thing. You don't create to be seen. You create because something inside you insists on it. Collaboration enhances creativity, but so does solitude. Groups generate more ideas. Individuals refine them. The best creative process often alternates between the two. Time with others to spark possibilities, time alone to develop them. Creativity is both social and solitary. It needs conversation and it needs silence. Your mood affects your creativity. Positive emotions broaden your thinking, helping you see more possibilities. Negative emotions narrow your focus, which can be useful for detail-oriented work. Neither is better. They're different tools. Creativity isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's born from sadness, anger, or frustration. All emotions have creative potential. The brain's default mode network is most active when you're not focused on the external world. This is when you reflect, remember, imagine. Modern life offers fewer and fewer of these moments. We fill every pause with screens, with noise, with distraction. But creativity needs those pauses. It needs the empty spaces where thoughts can form. Children don't separate work and play. Everything is exploration. Everything is discovery. Adults create rigid categories. This is work. This is leisure. But the most creative people blur those lines. They find play in their work and purpose in their play. The division is artificial. Creativity doesn't recognize it. Pattern recognition is at the heart of creativity. Your brain is constantly looking for patterns in sights, sounds, ideas, experiences. When you notice a pattern no one else has seen, that's insight. When you break a pattern everyone expects, that's originality. Creativity is the dance between seeing patterns and disrupting them. Your hands know things your mind doesn't. This is called embodied cognition. Sculptors, surgeons, musicians, they often work by feel, letting their hands lead. The knowledge isn't stored in conscious thought. It's stored in muscle memory, in the fingertips. Creativity isn't just a mental process. It lives in the body too. Children believe in magic longer than adults because their brains are still learning the rules of cause and effect. They're open to the impossible because they haven't fully defined what's possible yet. This openness is a form of genius. Adults spend so much time learning what can't be done that they forget to ask what might be done. The concept of inspiration is ancient. The word comes from the Latin inspirare, meaning to breathe into. The idea was that creativity was breathed into you by a divine force. You were the vessel, not the source. Maybe this takes the pressure off. You don't have to generate creativity from nothing. You just have to be open enough to receive it. Sleep deprivation kills creativity. Studies show that even one night of poor sleep impairs divergent thinking, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Your brain needs rest to consolidate memories, clear metabolic waste, and reset for the next day. Creativity isn't about pushing harder. It's about resting smarter. Every child is born with the capacity for creativity. It's not a rare gift. It's a human birthright. But not every environment nurtures it. Creativity needs encouragement, space, time, permission to fail. The question isn't whether someone is creative. The question is whether they've been allowed to be. Your brain is never idle. Even at rest, It consumes 20% of your energy. It's processing memories, running simulations, making predictions. The creative mind is always working, even when you're not aware of it. Ideas don't arrive out of nowhere. They're the result of countless background processes, running quietly while you live your life. The most creative people often feel like outsiders. They see the world slightly differently. They notice what others overlook. This can feel lonely, but it's also a strength. Creativity often requires a certain distance, a willingness to step outside the norm and observe from the edges. Belonging and originality are sometimes in tension. That's okay. Children learn through imitation. They watch, they copy, they adapt. This is how culture is transmitted. This is how creativity begins. You don't start by being original. You start by copying what works. Over time, your voice emerges. Imitation isn't the enemy of creativity. It's the training ground. The brain's reward system responds to novelty. When you encounter something new, dopamine is released. This is why exploring feels good. Curiosity isn't just intellectual. It's chemical. Your brain rewards you for seeking, for discovering, for creating. Novelty is fuel for the imagination. Writing by hand activates different brain regions than typing. The slower, more deliberate act of forming letters by hand engages memory and comprehension more deeply. This is why some writers still draft with pen and paper. The medium shapes the message. The tool influences the thought. Your imagination can rehearse social situations. Before a difficult conversation, you might imagine how it will go. This is mental simulation. Your brain runs scenarios, predicts responses, prepares you. Imagination isn't escapism. It's preparation. It's how you navigate a complex social world. Creative people often have higher levels of openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality traits. They're curious, willing to try new things, comfortable with complexity. But openness isn't fixed. It can be cultivated. You can practice saying yes to new experiences. You can train yourself to be more curious. Personality is not destiny. The brain's thalamus acts as a sensory gatekeeper, filtering what reaches conscious awareness. In creative states, this filter loosens. More stimuli get through. This is why creative people often seem distractible. They're not ignoring what's important. They're noticing more. Their filter is wider. Children don't judge their own work the way adults do. They create for the joy of creating. A drawing doesn't have to be good. It just has to be. Adults have internalized standards, expectations, comparisons. This is useful for refining skill, but it can also paralyze. Sometimes you have to create like a child again, without judgment, just for the sake of it. The brain's cerebellum, traditionally associated with movement, is also involved in creativity. It helps with timing, rhythm, sequencing. Creativity isn't just about ideas. It's about arranging them in time, building one thought on top of another. Structure and spontaneity work together. One without the other is incomplete. Imagination can reduce pain. Studies show that people who visualize themselves in a peaceful place report lower pain levels. The brain's attention is limited. When it's focused on an imagined scene, it has less capacity to process pain signals. Imagination isn't just mental. It's a form of intervention. Every culture has its own creative traditions. What's considered creative in one place might not be in another. Creativity isn't universal. It's shaped by values, by history, by what a community needs and celebrates. There's no single definition. There are as many forms of creativity as there are ways of being human. The gap between your taste and your ability is where growth happens. You know what good work looks like. Your own work doesn't measure up yet. This gap can feel discouraging, but it's also proof that you're learning. You're developing an eye faster than a hand. That's normal. The gap closes with practice. Your imagination is influenced by what you consume. The books you read, the art you see, the conversations you have, all of this feeds your creative reservoir. If you want to create something new, you have to fill your mind with raw material. Creativity isn't magic. It's transformation. You take what you've absorbed and reshape it into something else. Children live in the present moment more fully than adults. They're not worried about tomorrow or replaying yesterday. This presence is where creativity thrives. When you're fully here, fully engaged, your mind stops analyzing and starts experiencing. Creativity isn't about thinking harder. It's about thinking less and feeling more. The brain's prefrontal cortex is the last region to fully develop, finishing in your mid-20s. This region controls impulse, judgment, planning. Before it's fully online, you're more impulsive, more willing to take risks. This is why young people are often more creative. They haven't fully developed the voice that says, no, that's a bad idea. Sometimes bad ideas lead somewhere good. Every creative act is an act of faith. You don't know if it will work. You don't know if anyone will care. You do it anyway. You put something into the world that didn't exist before. That takes courage. Creativity isn't just skill. It's trust. Trust in the process. Trust in yourself. Trust that making something is worthwhile, even if no one ever sees it. Silence is where imagination grows loudest. When there's no external noise, your internal voice becomes clear. This is why some people need quiet to think. The world is loud. Creativity often whispers. You have to turn down the volume to hear it. In silence, thoughts that were buried under the noise of daily life begin to surface. They rise gently, like bubbles in still water. You notice things you didn't notice before. Connections form. Ideas that seemed scattered suddenly align. Silence isn't the absence of something. It's the presence of space. Space for your mind to stretch, to wander, to explore without interruption. Many of the world's great thinkers sought out silence deliberately. They went to mountains, to monasteries, to quiet rooms where nothing competed for their attention. They understood that the mind needs stillness to do its deepest work. In our modern world, silence has become rare. We fill every moment with sound, with stimulation, with distraction. But the cost is high. When the mind is always reacting to external input, it has no time to generate its own. Creativity requires both intake and output. You need to consume ideas, experiences, information, but you also need time to process, to digest, to let those inputs transform into something new. Silence is where that transformation happens. Your imagination will outlast you. The stories you tell, the things you make, the ideas you share, they ripple outward. They influence others. They become part of the larger conversation. You are not creating in isolation. You are adding to a chorus that began long before you and will continue long after. Creativity is how we speak across time. Every song, every painting, every invention, every story is a message sent forward. Future generations will encounter what you make, and it will shape them in ways you'll never see. This is both humbling and profound. Your work doesn't end when you finish it. It begins a new life, moving through the world, touching people you'll never meet, sparking ideas in minds not yet born. Think of the books that changed you, the music that moved you, the art that opened something inside you. The people who made those things are speaking to you across time. Some of them are long dead, but their imagination lives on. It lives in you now. And when you create, you're doing the same thing. You're sending a message forward. You're contributing to the great conversation that is human culture. No creative act is truly finished. It becomes part of the ongoing dialogue. It influences what comes next. Someone will see what you made and be inspired to make something of their own. That thing will inspire someone else. The chain continues, endlessly, across generations. You are a link in that chain. Your imagination, your creativity, your willingness to make something and share it, that's how culture evolves. That's how ideas spread. That's how humanity builds on what came before. Creative insight often arrives in 3 stages. First, preparation, when you gather information and immerse yourself in a problem. This is the research phase, the learning phase. You're filling your mind with raw material. You're reading, observing, experimenting, asking questions. You're living with the problem. You're turning it over in your mind from different angles. This stage can feel frustrating because you don't have the answer yet. But you're doing essential work. You're loading your brain with the pieces it will need later. Second, incubation. When you step away and let your unconscious mind work. This is the most mysterious stage. You stop actively thinking about the problem. You go for a walk. You sleep. You work on something else entirely. On the surface, nothing is happening. But beneath awareness, your brain is busy. It's sorting through the information you gathered. It's testing combinations. It's making connections you couldn't see consciously. This is why so many breakthroughs happen when you're not trying. The shower, the walk, the moment just before sleep. These are when incubation bears fruit. Third, illumination, when the solution suddenly appears. It arrives complete, seemingly out of nowhere. One moment you don't know the answer, the next moment you do. It feels like a gift, like something was handed to you. But it's not magic. It's the result of the work you did in the first two stages. The preparation gave your brain the raw materials. The incubation allowed it to process those materials without interference. And now, in illumination, the solution surfaces. You can't force the third stage. You can only set the conditions and wait. This is difficult for people who like to control outcomes. But creativity doesn't work on command. You have to trust the process. You have to do the preparation, allow the incubation, and remain open to the illumination when it comes. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes months, sometimes years. But if you've done the work, it will come. Some of the most creative environments are ones that encourage failure. Google's famous 20% time. Art schools that emphasize experimentation over perfection. Research labs that celebrate negative results. These places understand that creativity requires safety to fail. When failure is punished, people play it safe. They stick to what they know works. They don't take risks. They don't explore the edges where innovation happens. But when failure is expected, even celebrated, people become bold. They try things that might not work. They push boundaries. They learn faster because they're willing to make mistakes and adjust. Innovation dies in cultures of blame. It thrives in cultures of curiosity. Thomas Edison famously said he didn't fail. He just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. That mindset is essential for creativity. Every failed attempt is data. It tells you something. It narrows the field of possibilities. It brings you closer to what does work. But you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to look foolish, to produce something that doesn't work, to waste time and effort on paths that lead nowhere. This is the cost of exploration. Not every path leads somewhere useful, but you don't know which paths are dead ends until you walk them. The only way to avoid failure is to never try anything new. And that's not creativity. That's stagnation. Your brain's visual cortex can be hijacked by imagination. When you close your eyes and picture a sunset, the same neurons activate as if you were seeing one. This is why visualization is so powerful. Your brain treats imagined experiences as practice for real ones. Athletes use this. They visualize their performance before a competition. They see themselves executing perfectly. And studies show this actually improves performance. The motor cortex activates during visualization, just as it does during physical movement. Your muscles receive faint signals. Your brain is rehearsing, even though your body isn't moving. This principle extends beyond athletics. If you're preparing for a difficult conversation, visualizing it going well can help. If you're learning a new skill, imagining yourself performing it correctly reinforces the neural pathways involved. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between vivid imagination and actual experience. Both create memory traces. Both shape your expectations and responses. This is also why negative visualization can be harmful. If you constantly imagine worst-case scenarios, your brain treats those as real possibilities and prepares for them. Your body responds with stress. Your mood darkens. Your behavior changes. What you imagine shapes what you expect, and what you expect influences what you notice and how you act. Imagination isn't neutral. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used skillfully or clumsily. When you visualize success, you're priming your brain for success. When you visualize failure, you're priming for failure. This doesn't mean positive thinking solves everything, but it does mean your imagination has real effects on your brain, your body, and your behavior. Use it wisely. Children ask why repeatedly, not to annoy adults, but because they're building a mental model of how the world works. Each answer leads to a deeper question. This recursive curiosity is the foundation of scientific thinking. Adults often stop at the first explanation. Children keep digging. Why is the sky blue? Because of the way light scatters. Why does light scatter? Because of the molecules in the atmosphere. Why do molecules scatter light? Because of their size relative to the wavelength. Each answer opens another door. This is how understanding deepens. This is how knowledge is built. Layer by layer, question by question. But somewhere along the way, many adults lose this habit. We accept surface explanations. We stop asking why. Maybe we're embarrassed to seem ignorant. Maybe we're too busy. Maybe we've learned that questions aren't always welcome. But this is a loss. Curiosity is the engine of learning. Without it, we stop growing. We stop discovering. We settle for shallow understanding. The child's why is not naive. It's profound. It's the question that drives all science, all philosophy, all deep inquiry. When you stop asking why, you stop learning. When you keep asking why, you keep opening doors. There's always another layer, always another question, always something deeper to understand. The best teachers know this. They don't shut down questions. They encourage them. They model curiosity. They admit when they don't know something. They explore questions together with their students. Because teaching isn't about transferring information from one mind to another. It's about cultivating curiosity, about showing people how to ask good questions, about keeping that childlike sense of wonder alive. The Romantic poets believed imagination was the highest human faculty, more important than reason. They saw it as the power to transform perception, to see the infinite in the finite, the eternal in the temporal. Imagination wasn't escapism. It was a way of seeing truth that reason alone couldn't reach. William Blake wrote about seeing the world in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour. This wasn't metaphor. It was vision. The imagination, for the Romantics, could perceive connections and meanings that logical analysis missed. It could see the unity underlying apparent diversity. It could apprehend beauty, truth, and meaning directly, without needing to dissect or explain. For Blake and his contemporaries, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Keats, imagination was a faculty of perception, not fantasy, not daydreaming, but a way of seeing more deeply into reality. When Blake looked at a flower, he didn't just see petals and stems. He saw the infinite complexity of creation compressed into a single bloom. He saw time and eternity intersecting. He saw the divine manifesting in the particular. This wasn't because he was hallucinating or being fanciful. It was because his imagination allowed him to perceive layers of meaning that a purely analytical approach would miss. The Romantics emerged at a time when the Enlightenment had elevated reason to the highest position. Science was revealing the mechanisms of nature. Logic was solving problems that had mystified previous generations. Reason had proven itself immensely powerful. But the Romantics sensed something was being lost in this shift. Yes, reason could measure and quantify. It could break things down into component parts. It could explain how things worked. But could it tell you what things meant? Could it explain why beauty moves the soul? Could it capture the feeling of standing before a mountain or hearing a symphony or falling in love? This was a radical idea at a time when science and reason were ascendant. The Romantics weren't anti-reason, but they believed reason had limits. There are truths that cannot be proven, experiences that cannot be quantified, meanings that cannot be reduced to logic. Imagination gives access to these truths. It allows you to hold contradictions without resolving them. It lets you feel connections you can't articulate. It opens you to wonder, to awe, to the sublime. In our current age, dominated by data and analysis, this idea feels important again. We've gained much from rational inquiry. But we've also lost something. We've lost the sense that meaning and truth can be found through direct experience, through feeling, through the imagination's capacity to synthesize and unify. Consider how we approach a sunset. A scientist might explain it in terms of light wavelengths, atmospheric particles, the angle of the sun relative to the horizon. All of this is true. All of this is useful knowledge. But does it capture what it feels like to watch the sky turn orange and pink and purple? Does it explain why your breath catches? Why you feel suddenly small and connected to something larger? The scientific explanation and the felt experience are both real, but they're different kinds of knowledge. The Romantics would say the felt experience, accessed through imagination, is deeper, more essential, more true in some fundamental way. They believed imagination was synthetic, while reason was analytical. Reason breaks things apart to understand them. It isolates variables. It studies components. This is powerful, but it can also fragment reality. You end up with pieces that don't quite add back up to the whole. Imagination, by contrast, synthesizes. It brings things together. It sees relationships, patterns, wholes. When you listen to a symphony, you're not hearing individual notes in sequence. You're hearing music, the whole thing, as a unified experience. That's imagination at work. It perceives the gestalt, the pattern, the meaning that emerges from the parts, but is more than the sum of them. Blake's most famous lines capture this perfectly. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. What does this mean? It means the imagination can perceive that every particular thing contains within it the whole. The grain of sand isn't separate from the universe, it's part of it. It reflects it. The same laws that govern galaxies govern grains of sand. The same creative force that made everything made this one tiny thing. When you truly see the grain of sand, you see all of that. You see the universe concentrated in this small form. That's not fantasy. That's a deep perception of interconnection, of unity, of the way all things participate in a larger whole. The Romantics were responding to a worldview that treated nature as mechanism, humans as rational actors, and the universe as a clockwork running according to fixed laws. This view, emerging from Newtonian physics and Enlightenment philosophy, was powerful and productive, but it was also cold. It drained the world of meaning, of magic, of mystery. The Romantics wanted to restore what they felt was being lost. They wanted to say that yes, the world operates according to laws, but it's also saturated with meaning. Yes, humans are rational, but we're also emotional, spiritual, imaginative beings. Yes, we can study nature scientifically, but we can also experience it aesthetically, emotionally, spiritually. Coleridge distinguished between fancy and imagination. Fancy, he said, was merely rearranging existing images. It was superficial, decorative, clever but not deep. Imagination, by contrast, was creative in a more fundamental sense. It didn't just rearrange, it revealed. It penetrated to the essence of things. It perceived truth. This distinction mattered to the Romantics. They weren't defending mere fantasy or escapism. They were defending a faculty they believed gave access to reality at a deeper level than reason could reach. Wordsworth wrote about spots of time, moments in childhood or in nature when he felt something profound, something that stayed with him and shaped him. These weren't moments of rational insight. They were moments of imaginative perception, a moment watching the sunset over a lake, a moment alone in the mountains. These experiences carried meaning he couldn't fully articulate, but that meaning was real. It shaped his sense of self, his values, his understanding of what it meant to be human. For Wordsworth, these imaginative experiences were more important than anything he learned in books. They were direct encounters with something essential. Keats developed the idea of negative capability, the capacity to exist in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. This was a defense of imagination's way of knowing. Reason wants certainty. It wants clear answers. It wants to pin things down. But some truths are elusive. Some meanings resist definition. Imagination can hold these without needing to resolve them. It can appreciate mystery without needing to solve it. It can tolerate ambiguity, contradiction, paradox. This isn't weakness. It's a different kind of strength, a different way of engaging with reality. Think about how you experience poetry. If you approach a poem analytically, you might identify its meter, its rhyme scheme, its use of metaphor and symbol. You might analyze its themes, its historical context, its biographical connections to the poet's life. All of this is valid. But is this how the poem actually works on you? Isn't the real power of poetry in the way it makes you feel? In the way certain lines resonate, even if you can't explain why? In the way the whole thing creates an atmosphere, a mood, a sense of something you can't quite name? That's imagination at work. It's perceiving meaning that exists beyond the literal, beyond the analytical. The Romantics believed this capacity was under threat. They saw industrialization, urbanization, rationalization transforming society. They saw people becoming disconnected from nature, from each other, from their own deeper selves. They saw education becoming narrow, focused on utility and facts, neglecting the cultivation of feeling and imagination. They worried that humanity was losing something essential, and they used their art to preserve it, to remind people of what mattered, to demonstrate that imagination was not optional or decorative, but central to what it means to be fully human. In our current age, dominated by data and analysis, this idea feels important again. We've gained much from rational inquiry. We can cure diseases that once killed millions. We can communicate instantly across the globe. We can send machines to other planets. The achievements of reason are staggering. But we've also lost something. We've lost the sense that meaning and truth can be found through direct experience, through feeling, through the imagination's capacity to synthesize and unify. We live in a world that demands evidence, data, proof. If you can't measure it, it doesn't count. If you can't quantify it, it's not real. But love isn't quantifiable. Beauty isn't measurable. Meaning doesn't show up in datasets. Yet these are among the most important aspects of human life. They're what make life worth living. The Romantics would say we're impoverishing ourselves by privileging only what reason can grasp. We're living in half the world, seeing only what can be measured, missing what can only be felt. This doesn't mean abandoning reason. The Romantics weren't anti-science or anti-progress. They were arguing for balance, for recognizing that both reason and imagination have their place, that both reveal truth, just different kinds of truth, that a full human life requires both analytical thinking and imaginative perception. You need reason to solve problems, to build things, to understand mechanisms, but you need imagination to perceive meaning, to experience beauty, to connect with others, to find purpose. Art reminds us of this. When a piece of music moves you to tears, you're not crying because you've analyzed it and found it logically compelling. You're crying because it's touched something deep, something the imagination perceives but words cannot capture. This is real knowledge. It's a different kind of knowledge than scientific facts, but it's no less real. The imagination knows things, reason doesn't, and a life lived only by reason, without imagination, is impoverished. Think about the last time you were moved by art. Maybe a song that made you cry. Maybe a painting that stopped you in your tracks. Maybe a film that stayed with you for days. What happened in that moment? You encountered something that resonated with something inside you. Not your logical mind. Something deeper. Some part of you that recognizes beauty, meaning, truth when it encounters them. You can't always explain why something moves you. You just know that it does. That's imagination. That's the faculty the Romantics were defending. Maybe it was a particular chord progression that somehow captured exactly how loneliness feels. Or a scene in a film where two characters finally understood each other, and you felt that understanding in your own chest. Or a painting where the colors seemed to vibrate with emotion you couldn't name but absolutely recognized. These moments aren't random. They're not accidents. Something in the work is speaking to something in you. The artist imagined something, gave it form, and that form found its way to you across time and space and touched you. This is extraordinary when you think about it. The artist doesn't know you. They created something from their own inner experience, their own imagination, and yet it reaches you. It speaks to you. It moves you. How? Because imagination is universal, even though it's also deeply personal. The artist is using their imagination to capture something true about human experience. And your imagination recognizes that truth when it encounters it. This is a conversation across imagination. The artist's imagination speaking to yours. You can analyze the song. You can break down its structure, its chord progression, its lyrics, its production choices. All of that is interesting. But it doesn't explain why you cried. The tears came from somewhere else. From the place in you that imagination touches. The place that feels meaning before it thinks it. The place that responds to beauty, not because you've decided beauty is important, but because something in you simply recognizes it and is moved by it. They believed this faculty needed cultivation. It needed practice. Just as you train your logical mind through education, you train your imagination through engagement with art, with nature, with experiences that stretch your capacity to feel and perceive. They believed everyone had this capacity, but that it could atrophy if not used. In a culture that prizes only reason, only measurable outcomes, only practical results, imagination withers. People become functional but empty, competent but disconnected, successful by external measures but internally depleted. Imagination is like a muscle. Use it and it grows stronger. Neglect it and it weakens. If you never expose yourself to art, if you never spend time in nature, if you never allow yourself to be moved by beauty, your imaginative capacity diminishes. You can still function. You can still work, solve problems, manage daily life, but something essential is missing. You lose access to the deeper dimensions of experience. Life becomes flatter, thinner, less rich. The Romantics watched this happening in their own time. Industrialization was transforming society. People were moving from countryside to cities, from agricultural work to factory work. Life was becoming more mechanized, more routinized, more focused on efficiency and productivity. And the Romantics saw people changing, becoming more instrumental in their thinking, more focused on practical outcomes, less connected to nature, to beauty, to the inner life. They worried this was creating a new kind of poverty, not material poverty, but spiritual poverty, poverty of imagination. They saw education as central to this. They believed schools should cultivate not just intellectual skills, but emotional depth, aesthetic sensitivity, moral imagination. They believed children needed exposure to beauty, to nature, to art, to experiences that awakened their imaginative capacities. An education that focused only on facts and skills was incomplete. It produced capable workers but not fully human persons. The purpose of education, they believed, was to help each person become who they truly were, to unfold their potential not just for productivity but for meaning, for connection, for fulfillment. This was a radical vision. Most education systems then, and now, are designed to prepare people for economic roles, to teach them skills employers need, to make them productive members of society. All of this is necessary. But the Romantics would say it's not sufficient. A person who can work efficiently but has no capacity to appreciate beauty, to feel deeply, to imagine alternatives, to find meaning, that person is incomplete. They're functional but not flourishing. True education, the Romantics believed, should cultivate the whole person. It should develop not just the rational mind, but the imaginative capacity, not just the ability to analyze, but the ability to synthesize, to see connections, to perceive meanings. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. Not just skills, but character. Not just productivity, but humanity. This means exposing children to great art, not to memorize facts about it, but to experience it, to let it move them, to let it awaken their capacity to feel and perceive. It means taking them into nature, not to study biology, though that's valuable, but to simply be in nature, to experience its beauty, its vastness, its mystery, to feel small and connected and awed. It means giving them space for imaginative play, for making things, for exploring their own creative capacities without always being judged or graded. It means teaching them that there are different ways of knowing, that reason is powerful but not all-powerful, that imagination reveals truths reason cannot reach, that feelings contain intelligence, that beauty matters, that meaning matters, that a life focused only on achievement and accumulation is missing something essential. In our current education systems, these elements are often treated as extras, as nice-to-haves if there's time after covering the required material. Arts programs are cut when budgets tighten. Recess is shortened to make more time for test preparation. Nature experiences are rare. Everything is oriented toward measurable outcomes. But you can't measure imagination. You can't quantify the capacity to be moved by beauty. You can't test whether someone has developed emotional depth or moral imagination. These things are real and important, but they don't show up in data. The romantics would say we're impoverishing our children. We're training them to be economically productive but not fully human. We're developing their analytical capacities while neglecting their imaginative ones. We're teaching them to compete and achieve, while not teaching them to feel deeply, to create meaningfully, to find purpose beyond productivity. Blake was the most radical in this regard. He saw imagination as divine. He believed it was the human participation in the creative power that made the universe. When you imagine, when you create, you're doing what God does. You're bringing something into existence that wasn't there before. You're not imitating reality. You're adding to it. You're co-creating. This gave art a spiritual dimension. It wasn't entertainment or decoration. It was a sacred act, a way of participating in the ongoing creation of the world. For Blake, imagination wasn't separate from spirituality. It was spirituality, the capacity to see beyond the surface of things, to perceive the infinite in the finite, to create new possibilities. This was the divine spark in humans. Every person has this capacity. Every person is, in some sense, divine because of it. When you imagine, you're exercising your divine nature. When you create, you're doing sacred work. This is a very different view than seeing humans as primarily rational beings, or as primarily economic beings, or as primarily biological beings. All of these perspectives capture something true, but Blake would say they miss the essential thing, that we are imaginative beings, that our capacity to imagine and create is what makes us human in the fullest sense, and that cultivating this capacity is therefore a spiritual practice, whether or not you frame it in religious terms. This might sound grandiose, but think about it. When you make something, anything, you're bringing something new into existence. A meal, a garden, a story, a solution to a problem. These are all acts of creation. They add to the world. They change it. And they require imagination. You have to envision what doesn't yet exist. You have to bring inner vision into outer form. That's a remarkable capacity. It's what distinguishes humans from other animals. We can imagine possibilities and then actualize them. We can envision a different world and then build it. Animals respond to their environment. They adapt to what is. But humans imagine what could be and then make it so. A bird builds a nest following instinct. A human imagines a house, draws plans, gathers materials, constructs something that didn't exist. The bird's nest is impressive, but it's not creative in the same sense. It's programmed. The human house required imagination first. Someone had to envision it. Someone had to hold an image in their mind of something that wasn't there yet, and then bring it into being. This applies to everything humans make. Every tool, every building, every system, every work of art, every piece of technology, all of it began in imagination. Someone pictured it first. Someone saw in their mind what didn't exist in the world, and then they figured out how to make it real. This is the power Blake was talking about. This is the creative capacity he saw as divine. We're not just inhabitants of reality, we're makers of it. We're co-creators. Consider the simplest act of making breakfast. You don't just follow a recipe mechanically. You imagine what you want to eat. You picture flavors, textures, colors on a plate. You adjust based on what's available, what sounds good, what your body needs. You're creating something that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. It's not art with a capital A, but it's creative. It requires you to hold an image in your mind and then make it real. Every meal is an act of bringing imagination into the world. You imagine eggs, perhaps. You see them in your mind, golden yolks, whites just set, maybe with salt and pepper, maybe with herbs. You imagine toast, crispy and warm, with butter melting into it. You imagine how these will look together on a plate, how they'll taste, how they'll satisfy your hunger. All of this happens in imagination first. Then, you act. You crack the eggs. You heat the pan. You adjust the temperature. You watch for the right moment. You're translating inner vision into outer reality. The same is true when you're getting dressed. You imagine how you want to look, how different clothes will feel, what impression you want to make, or what mood you want to embody. You're not just covering your body. You're expressing something. You're creating a presentation of self. That requires imagination. You have to picture it before you can do it. When you have a conversation, you're creating too. Words didn't exist in the air before you spoke them. You imagined what to say, how to say it, what effect it might have. You brought language into being. You created meaning where there was silence. Even casual conversation is creative. You're improvising, responding, shaping the interaction as it unfolds. You're co-creating the experience with the other person. When you solve a problem at work, you're creating. The solution didn't exist before. You had to imagine possibilities, test them mentally, envision how they might work. You had to create something new, even if it's just a new way of organizing tasks or a new approach to a challenge. That's imagination at work. That's the creative capacity Blake saw as sacred. So everything you do, nearly everything, involves imagination and creation. You're constantly bringing inner vision into outer form. You're constantly making things that weren't there before. You're constantly participating in the ongoing creation of the world. This isn't grandiose. It's simply true. It's what humans do. It's how we live. Blake would say, recognizing this is important. Because when you recognize that you're a creator, that your imagination has power, that what you make matters, you start to take it seriously. You start to cultivate your imaginative capacity. You start to ask what you want to create, what you want to bring into the world, what kind of world you want to help build. And you start to see others as creators too. Everyone is imagining and creating constantly. Everyone is bringing their inner vision into outer form. Everyone is participating in creation. This creates a sense of responsibility. What we all imagine and create together becomes the world we all live in. We're not separate from the world. We're making it. Every day, every choice, every action. The Romantics believed that if more people understood this, if more people cultivated their imaginative capacities, if more people took seriously their role as creators, the world would be different. There would be more beauty, more meaning, more connection, because people would be creating consciously, intentionally, from their deepest values and visions, rather than just reacting, just getting by, just doing what they're told. This is why they cared so much about education, because education shapes imagination. It can open it or close it. It can cultivate it or stunt it. An education that treats students as empty vessels to fill with facts produces people who see themselves as passive receivers of reality. They learn what is, but not how to imagine what could be. They're trained to accept, not to create. but an education that treats students as creative beings, as imaginers and makers, produces different people. People who see themselves as active participants in shaping reality. People who ask not just what is, but what could be. People who take seriously their capacity to imagine and create. People who understand that they're not just living in the world, but making it. The Romantics would say, this is the kind of education we need. Not just for economic reasons, though creativity is economically valuable. Not just for personal fulfillment, though it's essential for that, but for the world. Because the world we get is the world we create, and we create from our imaginations. If our imaginations are narrow, fearful, stunted, we create a narrow, fearful world. But if our imaginations are expansive, generous, cultivated, we create something better. This is why engaging with art matters, why spending time in nature matters, why making things matters. Not because these are pleasant diversions, though they are, but because they train imagination. They expand your capacity to see, to feel, to perceive, to create. They make you more fully human. They help you become what you have the potential to be. When you look at a great painting and let yourself be moved by it, you're not just having a nice experience. You're exercising your imagination. You're strengthening your capacity to perceive beauty, meaning, truth. When you read a novel and let yourself care about characters who don't exist, you're training empathy. You're expanding your capacity to imagine other perspectives, other lives. When you make something, anything, you're practicing creation. You're developing your ability to bring inner vision into outer form. All of this matters, not in a measurable, quantifiable way, but in a deep, essential way. It makes you more capable of living fully, of connecting deeply, of creating meaningfully. It makes you more human. And a world full of people who are more fully human is a different world than a world full of people who are merely functional. The Romantics believed this. They staked their lives on it. They wrote and painted and created, not for fame or money, though some achieved those, but because they believed imagination mattered, because they believed art mattered, because they believed that cultivating the human capacity to imagine and create was essential work. Work that shapes not just individual lives, but the shared world we all inhabit. So when you're moved by art, when you feel something deep and true that you can't quite explain, that's not frivolous. That's your imagination responding. That's the divine spark in you, recognizing itself in what another person created. That's the conversation across imagination that makes us human. That's what the Romantics were defending. That's what they believed was worth protecting, worth cultivating, worth living for. Or think about solving a problem at work. Before you can solve it, you have to imagine solutions. You have to picture different approaches, different outcomes, different ways the pieces might fit together. You're not just analyzing what is, you're envisioning what could be. That's imagination. And when you implement the solution, you're making your imagined possibility real. You're changing the world, even if just in some small way. That's the human superpower. Not strength or speed or any physical attribute. It's this ability to think beyond what exists, to picture what doesn't, and then to make it so. The Romantics believed this capacity was both our greatest power and our greatest responsibility. Power because it allows us to shape our world, to create beauty, to solve problems, to transform reality. Every human-made thing began as imagination. Every building, every tool, every system, every work of art. Someone imagined it first. Someone saw in their mind what didn't yet exist in the world, and then they brought it forth. This is extraordinary when you pause to consider it. We're not just passive receivers of reality. We're co-creators of it. We shape it. We change it. We add to it. That's power. But with power comes responsibility. Responsibility because what we imagine and create has consequences. We can imagine and create things that enrich life or impoverish it, things that connect us or divide us, things that honor the earth or destroy it. Imagination is not morally neutral. What we choose to imagine matters. What we choose to create matters. Think about technology. Every technology began in someone's imagination. The internet, smartphones, social media. These were all imagined before they were built, and they've transformed human life in profound ways. Some of those ways are wonderful. We can connect with people across the world. We can access information instantly. We can share ideas and art and organize movements for change. But some of those ways are damaging. We're more distracted, more anxious, more divided. Our attention is fragmented. Our privacy is eroded. Our discourse is coarsened. The people who imagined these technologies didn't necessarily intend all these consequences. But the consequences are real, nonetheless. This is what the Romantics understood. When you create something, you're not just expressing yourself. You're putting something into the world that will have effects. It will influence other people. It will shape culture. It will change, in however small a way, the fabric of reality. You can't control all the effects, but you're responsible for considering them, for imagining not just what you want to make, but what impact it might have, for asking not just, can I make this, but should I make this? The Romantics applied this particularly to art. They believed artists had a responsibility because art shapes how people see and feel and think. A poem can change how someone understands their own experience. A painting can shift how someone sees the natural world. A story can make someone feel empathy for people unlike themselves. Art isn't neutral entertainment. It's a force. It has power, and therefore artists have responsibility. Not to preach or propagandize, but to be mindful of what they're putting into the world, to create with care, with intention, with awareness that their creations will ripple outward in ways they can't fully predict or control. Think about a poem that changed you. Maybe it gave you words for something you'd felt but couldn't name. Maybe it made you see your own experience differently. Maybe it showed you that someone else, perhaps someone who lived centuries ago, felt exactly what you feel. That connection across time, that recognition, that validation, it came from a poem, from words someone arranged on a page. Those words had power. They reached across distance and time and touched you. They changed something in you. That's what the Romantics meant when they said art has power. It's not abstract, it's real. A painting can change how you see trees. After you've looked closely at how an artist rendered light filtering through leaves, you notice that light differently when you're outside. The artist has given you new eyes. You see things you walked past before without noticing. The world becomes richer because of what the artist showed you. A story can create empathy where none existed before. You read about a character whose life is completely different from yours, someone from another time, another culture, another circumstance. And through the story, you enter their experience. You feel what they feel. You understand their choices. You care about them. And that caring can extend beyond the story. You might find yourself more open to real people whose lives are different from yours. The story trained your empathy. It expanded your moral imagination. This is why the Romantics took art seriously. Not because it's pretty or pleasant, though it can be those things, but because it shapes consciousness. It influences how people perceive reality, how they understand themselves, how they relate to others. Art isn't separate from life. It's woven into life. It's one of the primary ways humans make meaning, find connection, transmit values across generations. Artists create the images and stories and songs that populate our inner worlds. They give us language for our experiences. They show us possibilities we hadn't imagined. They make visible what was invisible. They make speakable what was unspeakable. This is profound work. And with that power comes responsibility. The Romantics were careful about this. They didn't think artists should be propagandists. They weren't saying art should serve ideology or moralize or instruct in some heavy-handed way. They understood that when art becomes mere propaganda, it loses its power. It becomes manipulation rather than revelation. People resist being told what to think, but they're open to being shown new ways of seeing. Good art doesn't preach. It presents. It creates an experience. It invites you in. And through that experience, you discover something. You come to your own realizations. You feel your own feelings. The artist hasn't told you what to think. They've created conditions for you to think and feel in new ways. That's the difference. That's why art is powerful without being manipulative. But even art that doesn't intend to teach or persuade has effects. It shapes what people find beautiful, what they find meaningful, what they aspire to, what they fear, how they understand themselves. Artists are putting images and stories and sounds into the world that will influence countless people in ways the artist can't fully control or predict. That's the responsibility. Not to control the effects, but to be mindful that there will be effects. Wordsworth wrote about nature in ways that changed how his readers saw the natural world. Before the Romantics, nature was often viewed as something to be tamed, controlled, exploited. It was resource or obstacle. But Wordsworth wrote about nature as beautiful, as spiritual, as healing. He wrote about the joy of walking in the countryside, the peace of sitting by a lake, the profound feelings that arise from being in wild places. And his poetry helped create a new cultural appreciation for nature. People started valuing nature differently, wanting to preserve it, seeking it out for its own sake, not just for what could be extracted from it. Did Wordsworth intend to create an environmental movement? Not in any explicit sense. He was writing about his own experience, his own love of nature, but his words had effects far beyond his intention. They changed culture. They influenced how generations of people after him saw the natural world. That's the power of art. That's the responsibility artists carry. Blake wrote and illustrated works that challenged authority, questioned conventional morality, explored spiritual truths outside organized religion. His work was radical, dangerous, even in his time. He could have been prosecuted for some of what he published, but he believed imagination required freedom. He believed artists had a responsibility to tell truth as they saw it, even when that truth was uncomfortable or subversive, even when it challenged power, even when it risked consequences. For Blake, the artist's responsibility wasn't to please authorities or conform to social expectations. It was to truth, to vision, to the demands of imagination itself. He believed that when imagination is censored or constrained, everyone suffers. Society becomes rigid, people become less free, truth becomes harder to speak. So the artist's responsibility includes courage, the willingness to create what needs to be created, even when it's risky. Every time you make a choice about how to spend your time, your money, your attention, you're creating. You're shaping not just your own life, but the world around you. You're voting with your choices for the kind of world you want to live in. If you choose to support businesses that exploit workers, you're creating more exploitation. If you choose to support businesses that treat people fairly, you're creating more fairness. Your choices matter. Your imagination, channeled through your choices, shapes reality. The Romantics would say this is why it's essential to cultivate your imagination toward good ends, to imagine beauty, not ugliness, to imagine connection, not division, to imagine flourishing, not harm. What you habitually imagine shapes what you create, and what you create shapes the world. If your imagination is narrow, fearful, cynical, that's what you'll create. But if your imagination is expansive, generous, hopeful, you'll create differently. You'll add different things to the world. They also believed imagination required solitude and silence. Not constant solitude, but regular time alone with your own thoughts. Time to wander, to reflect, to let your mind move at its own pace. In solitude, away from the demands and distractions of social life, the imagination can roam freely. You can hear your own inner voice. You can notice what you actually think and feel, not what you're supposed to think and feel. Wordsworth took long walks alone in nature. Blake worked in his studio for hours, conversing with visions. Keats would sit quietly, letting his mind drift, waiting for images and insights to arise. There's something about being alone that changes the quality of your thoughts. When no one is watching, when no one is expecting anything, when you're not trying to present yourself in any particular way, your mind settles into a different rhythm. The performance ends, the social mask drops. What remains is something quieter, something more authentic, something that feels more like your actual self. In company, even comfortable company, you're always partly aware of the other person. You're reading their reactions. You're adjusting your words, your tone, your body language. You're navigating the shared space between you. This is natural. This is how relationships work. But it also means you're not fully alone with your own thoughts. Part of your attention is always directed outward, toward the other person, toward managing the interaction. Solitude removes all of that. There's no one to navigate around, no one to adjust to, no one to perform for. You're just with yourself. And in that space, without the static of social interaction, your own thoughts become clearer. You notice things you didn't notice before, feelings that were buried under social demands, ideas that were drowned out by conversation, desires that were suppressed because they didn't fit the context. Solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is painful isolation, a feeling of being cut off from connection. Solitude is chosen time alone, a space to be with yourself. It's nourishing, not depleting. In solitude, you're not performing for anyone. You're not managing impressions or meeting expectations. You can drop the social self and encounter the deeper self. The self that exists beneath roles and obligations. The self that has its own thoughts, its own rhythms, its own voice. Loneliness hurts because you want connection and don't have it. You feel isolated, cut off, like no one understands you or cares about you. Loneliness is absence, a lack of something essential. But solitude is presence. It's the presence of yourself, finally given full attention. It's not empty, it's full of your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own imagination. Many people fear solitude because they confuse it with loneliness. They think being alone means being lonely, so they fill every moment with company, with noise, with distraction. They're afraid of what they might find if they stopped and sat alone with themselves. What if there's nothing there? What if they're boring? What if the silence is unbearable? But the Romantics knew differently. They knew that solitude isn't empty. It's where your deepest self lives. The self that gets buried under all the roles you play, all the expectations you meet, all the ways you adapt to fit into social situations. That self is still there. It's always there. But you can only hear it in solitude, in silence, when everything else drops away. This self is where imagination lives. It's where your original thoughts come from. The thoughts that aren't just reactions to what others have said or done. The thoughts that are genuinely yours. In constant company, you're always responding, always adjusting to others, always in dialogue. That's valuable. But it's not where imagination grows strongest. Imagination needs space. It needs silence. It needs time to develop its own ideas without immediately checking them against external feedback. Think about how ideas form in conversation versus in solitude. In conversation, you say something. The other person responds. You respond to their response. Ideas develop through this back and forth. This is collaborative thinking. It's valuable. You get perspectives you wouldn't have alone. You're challenged. You're pushed. Ideas get refined through dialogue. But there's a different kind of thinking that happens in solitude. It's slower, more meandering, less directed. Your mind wanders from one thing to another without any external input. You follow associations that make sense only to you. You sit with half-formed thoughts without having to articulate them yet. You let ideas develop at their own pace, in their own way, without the pressure of having to make sense to anyone else. This is where unusual connections form, where unexpected insights arise, where your imagination can explore freely without worrying about whether what it's exploring makes sense or is acceptable or will be understood. In solitude, your imagination doesn't have to justify itself. It can just be. It can play. It can experiment. It can fail without consequence. It can succeed without applause. It can simply unfold according to its own nature. Wordsworth would walk for hours in the Lake District, alone, letting his mind wander as his feet wandered. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. He was just noticing the light on the water, the shape of the hills, the feeling of the wind, and in this receptive state, images and insights would come to him. Lines of poetry would form. Connections would emerge. He wasn't forcing anything. He was allowing his imagination to work at its own pace, in its own way. And then he would go home and write, capturing what had come to him in solitude. His walks weren't purposeful in the usual sense. He wasn't walking to get somewhere. He wasn't exercising to stay fit. He wasn't socializing. He was just walking, alone, letting his mind be as free as his body. The physical rhythm of walking, step after step, created a kind of meditation. His conscious mind was occupied with the simple act of moving through space. His unconscious mind was free to work. And in that state, things came to him. A line of poetry, an image, a memory that suddenly made sense in a new way, a feeling he'd had but never put words to. He wasn't sitting at a desk trying to write. He was walking, noticing, allowing. And his imagination, given this space, did what imagination does. It made connections. It found patterns. It created meaning. The landscape was important too. Not just any setting, but nature, wild nature, hills and lakes and sky, places where human presence was minimal, where the scale was vast, where you could feel small in the best way, connected to something larger, part of something ancient and ongoing. Nature didn't demand anything from him. It didn't judge or expect. It just was, and in its presence, he could just be too. He would notice the way light hit water and created patterns, the way clouds moved across the sky, the way wind sounded in different kinds of trees. These weren't important observations in any practical sense. They didn't solve problems or generate income, but they fed his imagination. They gave him images to work with. They connected him to the world in a way that felt profound, even if he couldn't articulate exactly why. And later, when he sat down to write, those images would return, sometimes immediately, sometimes weeks or months later, but they were there, stored in his imagination, waiting to be shaped into poetry. The solitary walks weren't separate from his creative work. They were essential to it. They were where the raw material was gathered, where the imagination was fed, where the inner life was nourished. Blake had a different practice. He would work in his studio, engraving, painting, writing, often for long hours alone. He described having visions, conversations with angels and historical figures who visited him in his imagination. To him, these were real encounters, not fantasies. His imagination was so vivid, so active, that it created a world as real as the physical one. Whether you believe in literal visions or see them as metaphors doesn't matter. What matters is that Blake cultivated a rich inner life through solitude. He spent time in imaginative spaces, and that's where his extraordinary work came from. Blake's solitude was different from Wordsworth's walks. Where Wordsworth was receptive, noticing, allowing, Blake was actively engaging with his visions. He was having conversations. He was arguing with angels. He was being shown things by historical figures. His imagination wasn't passive. It was intensely active, but it still required solitude. These visions came to him when he was alone, when there were no external voices competing with the internal ones. He would spend hours in his studio, working on engravings. The physical work of engraving, careful, precise, repetitive, created a kind of meditative state. His hands were occupied. His conscious attention was on the technical details of the work, and in that state, his imagination could roam. Figures would appear to him, speak to him, show him things. He experienced these as real presences, not metaphors or symbols, but actual beings visiting him. To contemporary readers, this might sound like mental illness, but Blake was highly functional. He worked steadily throughout his life. He maintained relationships. He produced an enormous body of work. His visions weren't disrupting his life. They were enriching it. They were the source of his creativity. Whether they were literal supernatural encounters or products of an extraordinarily vivid imagination doesn't really matter. What matters is that Blake took them seriously. He engaged with them, he learned from them, and he created from them. And he could only do this in solitude. In company, the visions didn't come, or if they did, he couldn't attend to them. Social interaction pulled his attention outward, but in solitude, he could turn inward, could enter the imaginative realm where these figures existed, could have the conversations that fed his work. This is a more intense version of what everyone experiences in solitude. Maybe you don't have visions of angels, but you have thoughts, feelings, insights that come only when you're alone. Times when you suddenly understand something about yourself. Moments when a solution to a problem appears. Flashes of memory that suddenly make sense. These are your imagination at work, and they require the conditions Blake created. Solitude, silence, space for the inner world to become vivid. Keats had yet another approach. He would sit quietly, letting his mind drift, waiting for images and insights to arise. He practiced what he called negative capability, the ability to exist in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. This meant not forcing his imagination, not demanding it produce, not grabbing at ideas as soon as they appeared, just sitting, waiting, allowing. This is perhaps the hardest practice, because it requires patience, it requires trust. You sit alone, and for a while, nothing happens. Your mind wanders, but doesn't seem to go anywhere interesting. You feel restless. You wonder if you're wasting time. You're tempted to give up, to do something else, to check your phone, to find some external stimulation. But if you wait, if you stay with it, if you trust that your imagination is working even when you can't see it, eventually, something comes. An image, a feeling, a line, a connection you didn't see before. It arrives not because you forced it, but because you created the conditions for it. You made space. You stayed in the uncertainty. You didn't rush to conclusions or grab at the first thing that appeared. Keats understood that the best work comes from this patient waiting, from allowing the imagination to move at its own pace, from not imposing your conscious will on the creative process, but instead learning to listen to what wants to emerge. This is a different relationship with your own mind, not controlling it, not directing it, but attending to it, being receptive to it, trusting it. All three of these practices, Wordsworth's walks, Blake's studio visions, Keats's patient waiting, required the same thing: solitude, time alone, space away from social demands and external stimulation, time for the inner world to become as vivid and real as the outer world, time for imagination to do its work. And this is increasingly rare in modern life. We're never alone. Not really. Even when we're physically alone, we're connected through devices. We're scrolling through other people's thoughts. We're consuming content. We're reachable. Someone might text or call or email at any moment. We're alone, but not in solitude. Not in the deep sense the Romantics meant. True solitude requires disconnection. It requires being unreachable. It requires turning off the devices and sitting with yourself, with no input, no distraction, no escape, just you and your own mind. And for many people, this has become almost frightening. What if you're bored? What if there's nothing interesting in your own mind? What if the silence is unbearable? But this fear is usually unfounded. Your mind is actually very interesting when given the chance. It's full of memories, ideas, feelings, connections you haven't noticed because you've been too busy consuming external content. When you finally create space, when you sit in genuine solitude, your mind has room to work, room to wander, room to surprise you. At first, it might be uncomfortable. You might be restless. You might feel bored or anxious. That's the withdrawal from constant stimulation. That's your nervous system adjusting to a slower pace. But if you push through that initial discomfort, something else emerges. A different quality of awareness. A different quality of thought. Deeper, more original. more yours. You start to notice your actual thoughts, not just reactions to content you've consumed. You start to feel your actual feelings, not just emotional responses to stimuli. You start to hear your own voice, the one that gets drowned out by all the external noise. And that voice has things to say, ideas to explore, feelings to process, imagination to express. This is where creativity begins. In solitude, in silence, in the space between external demands. This is where you meet yourself, your actual self, not the self you perform for others. And that self is the source of your creativity, your originality, your unique contribution. You can't access it without solitude. You can only find it when everything else falls away. The Romantics built their lives around this understanding. They protected time for solitude. They chose to live in places that supported it. The Lake District for Wordsworth, the edge of London for Blake, where he could work undisturbed. They valued social relationships, but they valued solitude more. Or rather, they understood that rich social life requires a rich inner life, and inner life requires solitude to develop. In our time, this wisdom feels urgent. We're more connected than ever, but perhaps less in touch with ourselves. We have more access to information, but less time to think. We're more productive, but less creative. We're busier, but not necessarily doing work that matters. The solution isn't to withdraw completely. The Romantics didn't advocate isolation. They advocated balance, social time and solitary time, engagement and withdrawal, speaking and listening to your own thoughts. But that balance has tipped. Most people have far more social time than solitary time, far more external stimulation than internal space. And the cost is creative poverty, imagination withering, the inner voice growing fainter, the unique self getting lost under all the roles and expectations and external demands. Reclaiming solitude means reclaiming yourself. It means creating regular time, daily if possible, when you're alone, truly alone. Not alone with your phone, not alone with music or podcasts or TV, but alone in silence, walking without headphones, sitting without screens, lying in bed without immediately reaching for a device, just being, just noticing what your own mind does when left to its own devices. It might feel strange at first. It might feel like you're not doing anything productive, but you're doing the most important thing. You're giving your imagination space to breathe. You're nourishing your inner life. You're maintaining connection with your actual self. And from that connection, everything else flows. Your creativity, your sense of meaning, your capacity for original thought, your ability to contribute something unique to the world. The Romantics knew this. They lived it. And their work that still speaks to us centuries later, came from that commitment to solitude, to silence, to the patient cultivation of inner life. They're inviting us to do the same, to reclaim time for ourselves, to create space for our imaginations, to value solitude not as loneliness but as essential nourishment, to understand that who we are and what we can create depends on having regular time alone with our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own imagination. This is the practice. This is the path. Not complicated, not requiring special equipment or training, just time, alone, in silence, letting your mind wander where it wants to go, trusting that your imagination knows what it's doing, allowing it to work at its own pace, and then, when you return to the world, bringing back what you found in solitude, sharing it, creating from it, adding your unique vision to the ongoing conversation that is human culture. Keats had what he called negative capability, the ability to sit with uncertainty, with mystery, with not knowing. He would let his mind drift without trying to force it toward conclusions. He would sit with images and feelings, letting them develop at their own pace. This required solitude. It required silence. It required patience. You can't do this in a crowded room or with constant interruptions. You need space. You need time. You need freedom from external demands. In our hyper-connected age, this kind of solitude is increasingly rare. We're always reachable, always stimulated, always consuming content. There's no space for the mind to wander, no silence for the inner voice to speak. The Romantics would say this is damaging our imaginative capacities. We're always reacting to external input, never generating from internal resources. We're consuming constantly, creating rarely. Our minds are full but not nourished, busy but not productive. The solution, they would say, is to reclaim time for solitude, for silence, for boredom even, to give the imagination space to breathe. Think about your own life. When was the last time you were truly alone with your thoughts? No phone, no screen, no music, no podcast, no other people, just you and your own mind. For many people, the answer is never, or so long ago they can't remember. We've filled every gap. Every moment of potential boredom is now filled with content. Waiting in line? Check your phone. Commuting? Listen to a podcast. Lying in bed? Scroll through social media. We've eliminated solitude, and with it, we've eliminated the conditions imagination needs to flourish. The irony is that we're consuming more creative content than ever. More books, more shows, more music, more art. But we're creating less. We're in input mode constantly, taking in what others have made, but rarely making anything ourselves. This creates an imbalance. Your imagination needs both. It needs input, yes. It needs exposure to ideas and beauty and different perspectives. But it also needs time to process, to digest, to transform what it's received into something new. That transformation happens in solitude, in silence, in the spaces between inputs. When you're constantly consuming, your mind is always in reactive mode. You're responding to what you're seeing or hearing. You're agreeing or disagreeing. You're analyzing or judging. But you're not generating, you're not creating, you're not imagining your own original thoughts. It's like trying to have a conversation where the other person never stops talking. You can't get a word in. Your own thoughts can't form because there's no space for them. Boredom is actually valuable. When you're bored, when there's nothing external to occupy your attention, your mind starts generating its own entertainment. It starts imagining. It starts creating. Children understand this naturally. Put a child in an empty room with no toys, and within minutes they'll have invented a game. They'll have created an imaginary scenario. They'll have transformed the space into whatever they need it to be. Adults have lost this capacity, or suppressed it. We reach for our phones the moment we feel boredom. We don't trust that our own minds have anything interesting to offer, but they do. Your mind is endlessly creative when given the chance. When given space and silence and freedom from external stimulation, it will generate ideas, images, solutions, stories. It will make connections. It will surprise you. But you have to give it the opportunity. You have to be willing to sit with boredom long enough for it to transform into imagination. The Romantics knew this. They structured their lives to include long periods of solitude, not because they were antisocial, but because they understood that creativity requires it. They had rich social lives too. They had friendships, collaborations, conversations, but they balanced social time with solitary time. They protected space for their imaginations to work. In practical terms, this means building solitude into your routine. It doesn't have to be hours every day. Even 20 minutes matters. Take a walk without headphones. Sit outside without your phone. Lie in bed after waking without immediately checking notifications. Just be. Just let your mind wander. See what comes up. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. You might feel restless. You might feel like you're wasting time. That's the addiction to stimulation talking. Push through it. The discomfort fades. And underneath it, you'll find your own thoughts waiting. You'll find that you have ideas you didn't know you had. That problems you've been struggling with suddenly have solutions. That creative projects you've been stuck on suddenly have direction. This isn't magic. It's just your imagination, finally given the space and silence it needs to work. All the input you've been consuming, all the experiences you've been having, they've been accumulating in your mind. But they need processing time. They need time to recombine, to transform, to become something new. That happens in solitude. The Romantics would also say that solitude connects you to yourself. In constant company, you can lose track of who you are. You become what others expect. You perform roles. You meet obligations. You adjust and accommodate. There's nothing wrong with this. It's part of living in society. But if you never step back from it, you lose touch with your authentic self. The self that exists independent of roles and expectations. The self that has its own desires, its own values, its own voice. Solitude is where you encounter that self, where you hear that voice, where you remember what you actually want, not what you think you should want, where you notice how you actually feel, not how you're supposed to feel. This self-knowledge is essential. Without it, you're just reacting to external pressures. You're living someone else's life, or a composite of everyone's expectations. But when you know yourself, when you've spent time in solitude listening to your own inner voice, you can live from that place. You can make choices that align with who you actually are. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or isolated. It means becoming authentic. And authentic people connect more deeply with others because they're bringing their real selves to relationships, not a performed self. They have something genuine to offer. They have their own thoughts, their own perspectives, their own creativity. They're not just echoing what they've heard or conforming to what's expected. The Romantics believed imagination was sacred, that it was the divine spark in humans, that cultivating it was a spiritual practice. When you spend time in solitude, allowing your imagination to roam, you're engaging in something sacred. You're honoring the creative capacity within you. You're participating in the ongoing creation of the world. You're becoming who you were meant to be. In practical terms, this means treating solitude as essential, not optional, not something you do if you have time, but something you make time for. Just as you make time to eat, to sleep, to exercise, because you understand these are necessary for physical health. Solitude is necessary for imaginative health, for creative health, for spiritual health. Without it, you're depleted. Your well runs dry. You have nothing original to give because you've never given yourself space to generate anything original. So build it into your life. Protect it. Defend it against the demands that will inevitably encroach on it. Say no to some social obligations so you can say yes to time alone. Turn off your phone sometimes. Go places alone. Sit in silence. Walk without purpose. Let your mind wander where it wants to go. Trust that this isn't wasted time. Trust that your imagination is working even when you're not directing it. Trust that solitude is productive even when it doesn't feel productive. The Romantics would say, this is how you become fully human, not by constant activity and achievement and connection, but by balancing those with stillness and solitude and inner exploration, not by filling every moment with external input, but by leaving space for internal generation, not by always consuming what others have created, but by creating yourself from your own imagination in the silence and solitude where imagination grows strongest. Being fully human doesn't mean being maximally productive. It doesn't mean achieving the most or connecting with the most people or consuming the most content. Those things can be part of a full life, but they're not what makes you fully human. What makes you fully human is depth, interiority, self-awareness, the capacity to know yourself, to think your own thoughts, to feel your own feelings, to create from your own imagination. Modern culture pushes in the opposite direction. It values busyness. It measures success by external metrics, how much you've achieved, how many people you know, how visible you are, how productive you are. It tells you that empty time is wasted time, that being alone means being lonely, that if you're not constantly doing something, you're falling behind. But the Romantics would say this is backwards, that the constant activity is actually preventing you from becoming who you could be, that the endless consumption of other people's ideas is drowning out your own, that the pressure to always be productive is exhausting your creative capacity, that you're so busy doing that you have no time for being, and being is where your humanity lives. Being means stopping. It means sitting with yourself without agenda. It means allowing your mind to settle, to quiet, to reveal what's actually there underneath all the noise. It means encountering yourself not as a collection of roles and obligations, but as a consciousness, a living awareness, a unique perspective on existence that has never existed before and will never exist again. This takes time. It takes space. It takes solitude. You can't encounter your deep self in the midst of constant activity. You can't hear your inner voice when external voices are always talking. You can't create from your imagination when you're always consuming what others have imagined. You need withdrawal. You need stillness. You need silence. This isn't about becoming isolated or antisocial. The Romantics had rich social lives. They had deep friendships. They engaged with their communities. But they balanced social time with solitary time. They understood that you can only bring something genuine to relationships if you know who you are. And you can only know who you are through time spent alone. When you're always in company, you're always adjusting. You're reading others, responding to them, managing interactions, playing roles, meeting expectations. None of this is bad. It's necessary. It's how relationships work. But if it's all you do, you lose touch with the person underneath the roles. You become your function, your job, your relationships, but not yourself. Solitude lets you drop all of that. When no one's watching, when no one has expectations, when you're not performing any role, what remains? That's you. The actual you, not the employee, or the parent, or the friend, or the partner, just the consciousness experiencing life, the awareness, the self. And that self has its own nature, its own interests, its own rhythms, its own way of seeing things, its own imagination. But you can only discover this through solitude, through regular time when you're not being anything for anyone, when you're just being. This is the gift of solitude. This is the necessity of silence. This is where your imagination lives and breathes and makes what only you can make. This is where you become who you truly are, beneath all the roles and expectations and external demands. This is where creativity begins, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space you create for yourself, away from the noise of the world, alone with your own thoughts, listening to your own inner voice, trusting your own imagination to show you what you need to see. Creativity doesn't come from consuming more. It comes from digesting what you've consumed, from processing, from making connections, from allowing your unique perspective to interact with everything you've experienced and create something new from it. This process happens below conscious awareness. It happens when you're not trying, when you're not forcing, when you're just being. Your imagination is working all the time, but most of the time, you can't hear it. External noise drowns it out. The demands of daily life override it. The constant input pushes it aside. But in solitude, in silence, your imagination can finally make itself heard. Images arise. Ideas form. Connections emerge. Things you didn't know you knew become clear. Problems you've been struggling with suddenly have solutions. Questions you've been carrying suddenly have answers. Not always. Not on command. But regularly, reliably, if you create the conditions, if you give your imagination space, if you trust the process enough to sit in apparent emptiness, knowing that the emptiness is actually full of your own thoughts waiting to be noticed, your own feelings waiting to be felt, your own creativity waiting to be expressed. This is where you become who you truly are, not who others expect you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you actually are. The person you are when no one's watching, when there are no demands, when you're free to think and feel and be exactly as you are. Many people are afraid of this. They're afraid of what they might find if they sat alone with themselves. What if there's nothing there? What if they're boring? What if they're bad? What if the self, underneath all the roles, is somehow inadequate or disappointing? But this fear is almost always unfounded. What you find in solitude isn't emptiness. It's fullness. It's not boring. It's endlessly interesting. Your own mind, given space, is fascinating. Your thoughts wander in unexpected directions. Your feelings have depth and complexity. Your imagination creates continuously. Your consciousness is rich. The problem is we've been taught to distract ourselves from this richness. We've been trained to seek external stimulation, to fill every gap, to never be bored, to always be doing something. And in the process, we've lost touch with our own minds. We've forgotten how to be alone with ourselves. We've come to fear the very thing that would nourish us most deeply. Reclaiming solitude means reclaiming yourself. It means remembering that you're not just a function or a role. You're a consciousness, an imagination, a unique way of experiencing and interpreting reality. And that uniqueness is your gift. That's what you have to offer that no one else can offer. Not your ability to do what others can do, but your ability to see and create what only you can see and create. And when you return from solitude to society, you bring something back, something you created in that quiet space, something genuine and original and yours. That's what you offer the world, not just reactions and repetitions, but real creations, born from your own imagination. That's the power and the responsibility the Romantics spoke of. That's why solitude matters. That's why silence is necessary. That's why imagination requires space to breathe. When you create from solitude, from your own deep self, you create something that can't be replicated. You create something that carries your unique stamp, your way of seeing, your combination of influences and experiences and perspectives, your imagination working on the material of your life. This is authentic creativity, not copying, not imitating, not following formulas, but creating from your actual self. And this kind of creation is what the world needs. Not more of the same, not more imitations, not more products designed by committee to appeal to the broadest possible audience, but authentic expressions of unique perspectives, things that could only come from you, things that add something genuinely new to the conversation. Think about the art that moves you most deeply. It's usually not the most polished or the most technically perfect. It's the most authentic, the most personal, the work where you can feel the artist's actual self present, where you can sense that this came from somewhere real, from someone's deep experience, from their unique way of seeing, from their imagination working in solitude, creating something that had to be created. That's what you can offer. That's what your solitude cultivates. The capacity to create authentically, to add your voice, your perspective, your imagination to the world. Not because you're special or chosen or more talented than others, but because you're you, because you have your own way of seeing, because your imagination, given space and silence and time, will create things that only it can create. This is the balance the Romantics advocated. Not withdrawal from the world, but rhythmic engagement and withdrawal. Time in society and time in solitude. Consuming and creating. Receiving and giving. Listening to others and listening to yourself. Both are necessary. Both feed each other. But in modern life, the balance has tipped overwhelmingly toward one side. Toward constant engagement. Toward endless consumption. Toward perpetual activity. And the cost is creative poverty. Imaginative depletion. Loss of self. People who are functional but not fulfilled. Busy but not creative. Connected but not deep. Successful by external measures but empty inside. This isn't a moral failure. It's a structural problem. The culture doesn't support solitude. It doesn't value silence. It doesn't recognize that imagination needs space. But you can create that space yourself. You can claim time for solitude even in a culture that doesn't value it. You can turn off the devices. You can say no to some demands. You can protect time for silence. It's not easy. It requires intention. It requires saying no to other things. It requires overcoming the discomfort of being alone with yourself. But it's possible, and it's necessary. Start small. Even 10 minutes matters. 10 minutes sitting alone without distraction, without phone, without agenda, just sitting, noticing your thoughts, letting your mind wander, seeing what arises, At first, it might feel pointless. Your mind might race. You might feel restless. You might wonder if you're doing it right. But there's no doing it right. There's just being with yourself, allowing space, trusting that your imagination is working, even when you can't see results. The point isn't to force insights or create brilliance. The point is to create conditions, to establish a relationship with your own inner life, to remember that you have an inner life, to give it attention. Over time, you can extend this. Longer periods of solitude, walks alone, mornings before anyone else is awake, evenings after demands have quieted, time that's yours, time when you're not available to anyone else, time when you can just be. This is radical in a culture that demands constant availability, but it's necessary for your humanity, because being fully human requires interiority. It requires self-knowledge. It requires imagination. And these require solitude. They require space, apart from external demands. They require silence, so you can hear your own thoughts. They require time when you're not consuming or producing or connecting, but just being, just experiencing your own consciousness, just allowing your imagination to work. This is what the Romantics understood. This is what they practiced. This is why their work still speaks to us centuries later. Not because they were geniuses beyond normal capacity, but because they cultivated their imaginations. They created space for solitude. They valued silence. They trusted their inner lives enough to spend time there. And from that time, from that space, came creations that were genuinely new, genuinely theirs, genuinely meaningful. You have the same capacity, the same imagination, the same potential for depth and creativity and authentic expression, but you have to claim the space for it. You have to value your solitude enough to protect it. You have to trust your imagination enough to give it time. You have to believe that your inner life matters enough to tend it. This is the invitation. This is the practice. Not complicated, not requiring special talent, just time, alone, in silence, regularly, consistently, creating space for your imagination to breathe, listening to your own thoughts, trusting your own perspective, allowing your own creativity to emerge in its own time, in its own way, and then bringing what emerges back to the world, sharing it, whether that's art or ideas or simply a more authentic presence, whether that's something public or something private, whether it's recognized by others or known only to you. The value isn't in external validation. The value is in the authenticity, in creating from your actual self, in offering something genuine rather than something manufactured. This is the gift of solitude, the necessity of silence, the importance of imagination. This is how you become fully human, not by doing more or achieving more or connecting more, but by being more fully yourself, by knowing yourself deeply enough to create from that knowledge, by trusting yourself enough to speak from your own voice, by valuing yourself enough to give yourself the time and space you need. The world doesn't need more imitations, more copies, more products designed to fit expectations. The world needs authentic voices, unique perspectives, genuine creations born from actual human experience and imagination. Your experience, your imagination, your voice. But you can only offer this if you know what your voice sounds like. And you can only know that through solitude, through time spent alone with yourself, through silence that lets your own thoughts become audible, through space that lets your imagination unfold, through trust that what emerges from your depth is worth expressing. This is the practice. This is the path. The Romantics walked it. They're inviting you to walk it too. Not to become like them, but to become more fully yourself. To discover what your imagination creates when given space. To find your own voice in the silence. To become, through solitude and stillness and trust, the person only you can be. To create what only you can create. To offer what only you can offer. This is how you become fully human. This is the gift of solitude. This is why silence matters. This is where imagination lives. In the quiet space you create for yourself. In the stillness, you protect. In the trust you cultivate that your own mind, given space and time and attention, will show you what you need to see, will create what you need to create, will become what you're meant to become. They understood that imagination and feeling are connected. You can't perceive imaginatively without engaging your emotions. Reason can be detached, objective, cool. Imagination is involved, subjective, passionate. When you see the world imaginatively, you feel it, you're moved by it, you care about it. This is why art evokes emotion. It's not manipulative, it's engaging your imagination, which engages your emotions, which allows you to perceive meanings that pure reason misses. The Romantics valued feeling not as opposed to thinking, but as essential to a certain kind of thinking, the kind that perceives meaning, value, significance. This has implications for how we live. If imagination and feeling are connected, then a life that cuts off feeling also cuts off imagination. People who armor themselves emotionally, who refuse to be vulnerable, who stay always in control, are also limiting their imaginative capacities. They're protecting themselves from pain, but they're also closing themselves off from beauty, from wonder, from the full range of human experience. The Romantics would say, this trade-off isn't worth it. Better to feel deeply, even if that means sometimes feeling pain, than to numb yourself into a half-life. Art reminds us that feeling is knowledge. When you cry at a film, you're not being irrational. You're perceiving something true about the human condition. Your tears are a recognition of meaning. When you feel awe standing before a mountain or a work of art, that awe is a form of understanding. It's your whole being, not just your analytical mind, responding to something real. The Romantics trusted these responses. They believed feeling was a guide, not a distraction. That emotions contained intelligence, not just noise. This is a different model of human nature than the one that dominates contemporary culture. We tend to see emotions as irrational, as things to manage or overcome. We trust only what we can think through logically. But the Romantics would say, we're selling ourselves short. We're ignoring half of our equipment. We have reason and we have imagination. We have logic and we have feeling. Both are forms of intelligence. Both reveal truth. A full human life integrates both. The imagination knows things reason doesn't. It knows that a sunset is more than photons scattering. It knows that a person is more than a collection of atoms. It knows that love is more than neurochemistry. It perceives the meaning, the significance, the sacred dimension of things that science describes but doesn't capture. And a life lived only by reason, without imagination, is impoverished. It's functional but not fulfilling. It's efficient but not meaningful. It's competent but not fully human. The Romantics invite us to recover imagination, to trust it, to cultivate it, to recognize it as essential, not optional, to see it not as escapism but as a way of perceiving reality more fully, more deeply, more truly than reason alone allows. Improvisation in music, comedy, or theater trains the brain to think on its feet. Improvisers learn to say yes and to build on what came before rather than rejecting it. This mindset, accepting and expanding, is at the heart of creative collaboration. You don't shut down ideas, you build on them. In improv, someone makes an offer. You accept it and add to it, even if it's not what you expected, even if it's not the direction you would have chosen. You work with it. You find the potential in it. You build something together. This requires letting go of your agenda. It requires listening deeply to what's actually happening, not what you wish was happening. It requires trust. Trust in your partner. Trust in the process. Trust that something interesting will emerge if you stay open. This principle extends beyond performance. In brainstorming sessions, the yes and mindset generates more ideas. Instead of immediately critiquing or dismissing suggestions, you build on them. You ask, what if we took this idea and pushed it further? What if we combined it with something else? What if we applied it in a different context? This keeps energy and momentum going. It creates a generative atmosphere where people feel safe contributing. The opposite approach, the yes but or no because mindset, shuts things down. It makes people cautious. It kills momentum. People stop offering ideas because they don't want to be shot down. Obviously, at some point you need critical thinking. You need to evaluate ideas, to test them, to refine them. But in the early stages of creativity, yes and is more productive than no, because generate first, critique later, build first, edit later. This sequencing matters. If you critique while you're generating, you stifle creativity. If you generate without later critiquing, you end up with a mess. Both modes are necessary, but they work best when kept separate. Your brain's amygdala, the fear center, becomes less active during creative flow. This is why creating can feel therapeutic. For a while, worry quiets. The anxious voice recedes. You're too absorbed in what you're making to be afraid. Creativity is a temporary refuge from fear. When you're in flow, deeply engaged in creative work, your sense of time changes. Hours pass unnoticed. You forget to check your phone. You forget your worries. You're fully present, fully absorbed. The self-consciousness that usually chatters in the background goes silent. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking through the work. You and the work become one thing. This state is deeply satisfying. It's one of the best feelings humans can experience. And it's available to anyone who engages in creative work with full attention. You don't have to be a professional artist. You can find flow in cooking, in gardening, in solving a difficult problem at work, in playing with your children. Flow happens when the challenge matches your skill level. Too easy, and you're bored. Too hard, and you're anxious. But when the difficulty is just right, when you're stretched but not overwhelmed, flow becomes possible. And in flow, fear dissolves, anxiety quiets, the amygdala stands down. Your brain is too busy coordinating complex activity to waste resources on worry. This is part of why creative practices are therapeutic. They give you a break from the anxious mind. They offer an alternative to rumination. Instead of thinking about your problems, you're solving creative challenges. Instead of replaying past mistakes, you're making something new. The mind needs this. It needs breaks from itself. It needs absorption in something external. Creativity provides that. It's a door out of the self, into flow, into the deep satisfaction of making. When you're anxious, your mind loops. It replays the same worries over and over. What if this happens? What if I fail? What if they think I'm stupid? The thoughts circle endlessly, never resolving, never bringing relief. This is rumination, and it's exhausting. It doesn't solve anything. It just wears you down. But when you're engaged in creative work, that loop breaks. Your attention shifts. Instead of thinking about yourself and your problems, you're focused on the work, on the colors you're mixing, on the words you're choosing, on the melody you're composing, on the problem you're solving. Your mind has something to do other than worry, something absorbing, something that requires your full attention. This is therapeutic, not because you're avoiding your problems, but because you're giving your mind a break from itself. Rumination doesn't solve problems, it just rehearses them. Taking a break, engaging in something creative, often allows solutions to arise that couldn't come when you were stuck in the loop. Your unconscious mind can work on the problem while your conscious mind is occupied elsewhere. And there's something deeply satisfying about making, about taking raw materials and shaping them into something that didn't exist before, about solving the small challenges that arise in creative work. How to get this color just right, how to make this sentence flow better, how to fit this piece into the larger structure. These challenges are manageable. Unlike the big anxieties of life, these have clear solutions, and solving them feels good. Creative work gives you a sense of agency. When life feels overwhelming, when big problems feel unsolvable, when you feel powerless, making something reminds you that you can affect reality. You can take this lump of clay and shape it. You can take these words and arrange them. You can take these ingredients and transform them. In a small way, you have power. and that matters psychologically. Some neuroscientists believe creativity involves transient hypofrontality, a temporary dimming of the prefrontal cortex. This is the brain region responsible for self-criticism and conscious control. When it quiets, other regions communicate more freely. Ideas that would normally be filtered out get through. The inner editor takes a break. This happens during flow, during states of relaxation, during the moments just before sleep. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's executive. It plans, judges, controls, filters. It's essential for many tasks, but it can also be a creativity killer. It's the voice that says, "That's a dumb idea," or "You're not good enough," or "What will people think?" When that voice quiets, even temporarily, creativity flourishes. Think about your own experience. When do your best ideas come? Often not when you're sitting at your desk trying to force them, but in the shower, on a walk, just before you fall asleep. In these moments, your prefrontal cortex is less active. You're relaxed. Your mind is wandering, and ideas that your critical mind would have immediately dismissed get a chance to surface. The prefrontal cortex develops last and deteriorates first. Children are more creative, partly because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. They haven't learned to censor themselves. They don't know yet what's impossible, or impractical, or silly. So they try things adults wouldn't try. They make connections adults wouldn't make. Their imagination roams freely because the gatekeeper isn't fully online yet. As we age, the prefrontal cortex takes over more and more. We become more controlled, more filtered, more concerned with what's appropriate, what's realistic, what others will think. This is useful for navigating social life and making responsible decisions, but it's costly for creativity. The filter that keeps us from saying embarrassing things in public also keeps us from expressing wild ideas that might actually be brilliant. And in older age, as the prefrontal cortex declines, some people become more creative again. They care less what others think. They're more willing to take risks. They've lived long enough to know that perfection isn't possible, and that trying unusual things often leads somewhere interesting. The filter loosens, and creativity can flourish again. Transient hypofrontality means temporarily reducing that filter, not eliminating it, but quieting it, letting other parts of the brain communicate without the prefrontal cortex constantly judging whether their contributions are good enough. This is what happens in flow states. You're so absorbed in what you're doing that self-consciousness disappears. The voice that judges and criticizes goes quiet. You're just doing, just making, just creating. This is why alcohol and other substances can sometimes seem to enhance creativity. They reduce prefrontal activity. The filter loosens. Ideas flow more freely. But there's a cost. Fine motor control suffers. Judgment suffers. The ideas that flow might not actually be good. Substances can create the feeling of creativity without the reality. Genuine creativity requires both generation and refinement. You need the loose, associative thinking that comes when the prefrontal cortex relaxes. But you also need the critical thinking that comes when it's active. The best creative process alternates between these states. Generate with the filter off, then evaluate with the filter on. Brainstorm freely, then edit ruthlessly. Many famous artists and writers used alcohol or drugs. Hemingway drank heavily. Coleridge used opium. Numerous musicians have struggled with addiction. There's a romantic myth that substances fuel creativity, that you need to alter your consciousness to create great art. But look closer at these lives, and you see something different. The substances didn't make them creative. They were creative despite the substances, and often the substances eventually destroyed their ability to work. What substances do is temporarily reduce the filter. This can feel liberating. Ideas flow, inhibitions drop. You feel free, but the ideas aren't necessarily good. And the work produced under the influence often needs extensive revision when sober. The generation phase might feel easier, but the refinement phase becomes harder. Judgment is impaired. You can't tell good ideas from bad ones. You can't execute with precision. And over time, Substances damage the brain. They don't enhance creativity. They degrade the very faculties creativity depends on: memory, focus, emotional regulation, the physical capacity to work consistently. Many artists who struggled with addiction produced their best work during periods of sobriety, or they produced prolifically while using, but the quality was inconsistent. The myth persists because we romanticize suffering and struggle. But the reality is, substances are more likely to block creativity than enhance it. There are healthier ways to achieve transient hypofrontality. Meditation quiets the prefrontal cortex. So does exercise. So does being in nature. So does any absorbing activity that gets you into flow. These approaches reduce the filter without the costs. They allow loose, associative thinking, while preserving your capacity for judgment and refinement. The key is understanding that creativity requires both modes: generation and evaluation, divergent thinking and convergent thinking, the wild brainstorm and the careful edit. You need times when the filter is off, when ideas can flow freely without judgment. But you also need times when the filter is on, when you're critically evaluating what you've generated and refining it. Some people are naturally better at one mode than the other. Some people generate ideas constantly but struggle to refine them. They're always starting new projects but rarely finishing them. They have notebooks full of ideas but few completed works. They're strong on divergent thinking but weak on convergent thinking. Their challenge is to develop the discipline to see things through, to turn the filter back on after the initial creative burst, to do the hard work of refinement. Others are excellent critics but have trouble generating in the first place. They sit down to create and immediately hear the critical voice. That's not original. That's been done before. That's not good enough. Who do you think you are to try this? The filter is so strong that nothing gets through. They're excellent at evaluation but can't produce raw material to evaluate. Their challenge is to learn to turn the filter off temporarily, to give themselves permission to generate badly at first, to separate the generation phase from the evaluation phase. Knowing your natural tendency helps. If you're a natural generator, build in time for critical evaluation. Don't just move on to the next idea once the initial excitement fades. Force yourself to develop ideas fully, to refine them, to finish things. This might feel boring compared to the thrill of generation, but it's necessary. Ideas without execution are just daydreams. If you're a natural critic, practice generating without judgment first. Set a timer for 20 minutes and commit to generating ideas without evaluating them. Write down everything that comes to mind, no matter how silly or derivative or bad it seems. The point isn't to generate good ideas. The point is to generate at all. To prove to yourself that you can turn the filter off. Later, after the generation session is over, you can turn the filter back on and evaluate what you produced. But keep the two phases separate. Both capacities can be developed. Neither is fixed. If you're naturally good at generation, you can learn evaluation. If you're naturally good at evaluation, you can learn generation. It takes practice. It takes awareness of your tendency. It takes deliberately working on your weak area, rather than just playing to your strengths. The best creators alternate between these modes fluidly. They know when to turn the filter off and let ideas flow. And they know when to turn it back on and be rigorous about refinement. They don't judge during generation. They don't generate during evaluation. They keep the modes separate, and they develop both capacities to a high level. This is why creative process matters as much as creative talent. Talent is great, but without process, talent doesn't produce finished work. Process means understanding how your own mind works. When you're most generative, when you're most critical, how to move between these states, how to honor both without letting either dominate. For some people, mornings are for generation. The mind is fresh. The critical voice hasn't fully woken up. Ideas flow easily, so they generate in the morning and evaluate later in the day. For others, late night is the generative time. The prefrontal cortex is tired. The filter is weaker. Ideas come more easily. So they generate at night and evaluate the next day when fresh. There's no one right way. The point is to learn your own rhythms, to notice when your filter is naturally weaker and use that time for generation, to notice when your critical faculties are sharpest and use that time for evaluation, to design your process around how your brain actually works, rather than fighting against it, and to understand that both modes are necessary, that generation without evaluation produces a lot of mediocre work, that evaluation without generation produces nothing at all, that creativity requires both the wild, unfiltered flow of ideas and the careful, critical refinement of those ideas, that you need the prefrontal cortex to quiet down sometimes, so other regions can communicate, but you also need it to come back online, so you can evaluate and refine. This is the dance of creativity, between control and surrender, between judgment and acceptance, between the critical voice and the creative voice. Both are necessary. Both have their place. The art is knowing when to listen to each one, when to let ideas flow uncritically, and when to step back and ask, is this actually good? Does this work? How can I make this better? This balance is what makes creative work both challenging and rewarding. It requires different mental states, different modes of attention, different relationships with your own thoughts. Learning to move between these modes is learning to work with your own mind, to understand its rhythms, to honor both its wild, associative nature and its capacity for focused, critical analysis. And when you get it right, when you alternate effectively between generation and evaluation, the results are remarkable. Work that's both original and refined. Ideas that are fresh but also developed. Creations that surprise but also satisfy. This is what's possible when you understand the neuroscience of creativity, when you work with your brain rather than against it, when you honor both the need for transient hyperfrontality and the need for executive function, when you let both voices speak, each in their proper time. Children naturally engage in what psychologists call pretend play. They assign new meanings to objects, act out scenarios, create rules for imaginary games. This isn't frivolous. It's cognitive training. They're practicing flexibility, negotiation, narrative thinking, all skills they'll need as adults. When a child pretends a stick is a sword, they're engaging in symbolic thinking. They're holding two ideas simultaneously. This is a stick, and this represents a sword. This is the foundation of abstract thought, of metaphor, of all symbolic systems, including language and math. When children create elaborate fantasy scenarios with rules and roles, they're learning to construct and navigate systems. They're learning that rules can be negotiated, that roles can be flexible, that reality can be reinterpreted. And when they do this with other children, they're learning collaboration. They're negotiating who plays what role. They're building shared narratives. They're learning to see from someone else's perspective, to compromise, to contribute to something larger than themselves. All of this is essential learning. It's not separate from the serious business of education. It is education, perhaps the deepest kind. Children who engage in rich pretend play develop stronger social skills, better emotional regulation, more flexible thinking. Play is not a break from learning. It's one of the most powerful forms of learning. Adults often dismiss play as childish, but this is a mistake. Adults need play too. We just call it different things. Improvisation, brainstorming, recreational hobbies, games. These are adult forms of play, and they're just as important for adult brains as pretend play is for children. Play keeps the mind flexible. It creates space for experimentation. It allows you to try things without stakes, to explore without commitment, to fail without consequence. This is where innovation happens. This is where new ideas emerge. A culture that doesn't value play becomes rigid, brittle, unable to adapt. The Renaissance concept of the polymath, someone skilled in multiple disciplines, reflects a truth about creativity. The more domains you understand, the more connections you can make between them. Leonardo da Vinci was an artist, engineer, anatomist, and inventor. His genius lay in seeing how these fields informed each other. His understanding of anatomy made his paintings more realistic. His artistic eye informed his engineering designs. His engineering knowledge shaped how he approached art. He didn't see these as separate pursuits. They were all aspects of understanding how the world works. Each discipline enriched the others. In our modern age, we tend toward specialization. You're an expert in one narrow field. You know more and more about less and less. This has benefits. Depth of knowledge is valuable, but it also has costs. When you only understand one domain, you can only see problems from one angle. You can only use one set of tools. But when you understand multiple domains, you can borrow ideas across them. You can apply concepts from biology to economics, from music to mathematics, from philosophy to design. Some of the most innovative ideas come from cross-pollination between fields. Biomimicry, using nature's designs to solve engineering problems, is one example. Behavioral economics, applying psychology to economic questions, is another. You don't have to be a Leonardo-level polymath, but cultivating breadth alongside depth is valuable. Read widely. Learn skills outside your main field. Talk to people in different professions. Expose yourself to different ways of thinking. The connections won't always be obvious, but your brain will make them, often unconsciously. The engineer who studies poetry might find new metaphors for explaining technical concepts. The scientist who paints might develop a better eye for patterns in data. The chef who studies chemistry might invent new techniques. Knowledge compounds, and it compounds across domains, not just within them. Your imagination can simulate empathy. When you read a novel or watch a film, you imagine yourself in someone else's position. You feel what they might feel. This is theory of mind, the ability to model other people's mental states. Imagination isn't just about creating new things. It's about understanding other people. Every time you wonder what someone else is thinking, you're using imagination. You're constructing a model of their mind inside your own mind. You're simulating their perspective, their emotions, their motives. This is how we navigate social life. We can't directly access other people's thoughts, so we imagine them. Literature and art strengthen this capacity. When you read a novel from the perspective of someone very different from you, you're practicing empathy. You're stepping into another subjectivity, seeing the world through different eyes. This doesn't just happen cognitively. Brain imaging studies show that when you read about someone performing an action, your motor cortex activates. When you read about someone feeling an emotion, your emotional centers activate. You're simulating the experience. This is why stories are so powerful. They're empathy training. They teach you to care about people you've never met, to understand perspectives foreign to your own. In a fragmented world, this matters more than ever. Empathy is the antidote to tribalism, to the hardening of categories, to the dehumanization of the other. When you can imagine yourself into someone else's experience, it's harder to dismiss them, harder to demonize them, easier to recognize shared humanity. Imagination isn't just about art. It's about ethics. It's about building the capacity to see beyond your own limited perspective, to recognize that your view is one among many, to hold space for complexity and difference. The shower is a surprisingly common location for creative insights. The warm water, the white noise, the relaxation, all of this shifts your brain into a more diffuse mode of thinking. You're not trying to solve the problem anymore. You're just letting your mind wander. And that's when the answer arrives. There's something about the shower that creates ideal conditions for insight. You're alone. There are no distractions. You can't check your phone. You're engaged in a simple, repetitive activity that doesn't require much thought. Your mind is free to roam. The warm water relaxes your body, which relaxes your mind. The white noise of the water creates a gentle background that helps you tune out external concerns. You're in a liminal space, between sleep and full waking, between private and public, between thinking and not thinking. This is the diffuse mode of thinking. As opposed to focused mode, where you're concentrating on a specific problem, diffuse mode is wandering, associative, open. It's when your mind makes unexpected connections. It's when solutions to problems you weren't actively thinking about suddenly appear. Many creative people report their best ideas come in the shower or during other similarly relaxed, routine activities. Walking, washing dishes, driving on a familiar route. These are all situations where you're physically occupied but mentally free. Your conscious mind is doing something easy. Your unconscious mind is working in the background. And then, suddenly, an insight surfaces. You can't force this, but you can create conditions that make it more likely. Build in time for diffuse thinking. Take walks. Take long showers. Let yourself be bored occasionally. Don't fill every moment with input. Give your mind space to process, to wander, to make connections. The most productive thing you can do sometimes is nothing at all. Just be. Just let your mind drift. Trust that it's working even when you're not directing it. Trust that the answer will come when it's ready. And often, it will come in the shower. Some cultures emphasize individual creativity. Others emphasize collective creativity. In the West, we celebrate the lone genius. In many indigenous cultures, creativity is communal, woven into rituals, stories, and shared practices. There's no single right way to be creative. Context shapes what creativity looks like. Your brain's inferior frontal gyrus helps you suppress irrelevant thoughts. In highly creative people, this region sometimes shows less activity. They don't filter as aggressively. Stray thoughts, odd associations, tangential ideas, these slip through. What looks like distraction might actually be the raw material of insight. Children often develop passionate interests, dinosaurs, trains, space, and dive deep into them. They become experts on their chosen topic. This intense focus is a form of intrinsic motivation. They're not learning for a grade or approval. They're learning because they're curious. That's the purest form of creative drive. The concept of flow, popularized by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, describes a state of complete immersion. You're challenged just enough to stay engaged, but not so much that you're overwhelmed. Time disappears. Self-consciousness fades. You and the task become one. This is where the best creative work happens. Imagination evolved because it's useful. Being able to simulate scenarios, to imagine what might happen if I do this, gives you an advantage. You can plan, anticipate, prepare. Imagination isn't a luxury. It's a survival tool that became, over time, a source of art and wonder. Your brain's nucleus accumbens, part of the reward circuit, responds to both creative achievement and to beauty. Creating something satisfying and experiencing something beautiful activate overlapping neural circuits. This might be why artists often describe their work as a search for beauty. It's not abstract, it's neurological. Children build elaborate fantasy worlds, complete with rules, characters, and histories. Psychologists call these paracosms. They're not signs of isolation or maladjustment. They're signs of rich inner lives. Many famous writers and artists had paracosms as children. These imaginary worlds were training grounds for the work they'd do as adults. The creative process is rarely linear. You don't move smoothly from idea to execution. You loop back, revise, abandon, restart. This messiness can feel frustrating, but it's normal. Creativity isn't a straight line. It's a spiral, circling back to earlier ideas with new understanding each time. Your imagination is constrained by your language. If you don't have a word for a concept, it's harder to think about it. This is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that language shapes thought. Learning new words, especially from other languages, expands your conceptual toolkit. It gives your imagination more to work with. Some of the most creative people maintain a childlike sense of wonder. They haven't lost the ability to be surprised, to ask why, to find joy in small things. This isn't naivety. It's a deliberate practice. They've chosen not to let cynicism or routine dull their curiosity. Wonder is a skill you can cultivate. The brain's posterior cingulate cortex is involved in mind-wandering and self-referential thought. It's part of the default mode network. When you daydream, when you imagine future scenarios, when you reflect on yourself, this region is active. It's the neural substrate of your inner world. Children are natural storytellers. They narrate their play, create characters, invent conflicts and resolutions. Story is how humans make sense of experience. It's how we organize cause and effect, motive and consequence. Imagination and narrative are intertwined. To imagine is to tell yourself a story about what could be. Creative communities matter. The Inklings, Bloomsbury Group, Harlem Renaissance, Silicon Valley startups. These weren't just collections of talented individuals. They were environments where ideas cross-pollinated, where feedback was generous, where ambition was contagious. Creativity is social. It thrives in certain ecosystems. Your imagination can rehearse courage. Before facing something difficult, you can visualize yourself succeeding. Athletes do this. So do performers, public speakers, anyone preparing for a challenge. Visualization doesn't replace practice, but it supplements it. Your brain treats imagined rehearsal as partial preparation for the real thing. The arts have been part of human culture for at least 40,000 years. Cave paintings, carved figurines, musical instruments made from bone. Creativity isn't a recent development. It's ancient. It's fundamental to what it means to be human. We have been imagining, making, creating for as long as we've existed. Some people experience frisson, that shivery feeling when you hear beautiful music or read a powerful line of poetry. It's a physical response to aesthetic experience. Your body reacts to beauty and meaning. Imagination isn't confined to your head. It resonates through your entire nervous system. Children build with blocks, not to create something specific, but to see what happens. This is exploratory play. They're testing possibilities, learning physics, experimenting with balance and form. Adults often have a fixed outcome in mind. Children are more open to discovery. That openness is where creativity begins. The brain's claustrum, a thin sheet of neurons connecting many brain regions, might play a role in integrating information across different sensory and cognitive domains. Some neuroscientists think it could be involved in consciousness and creativity, helping to bind disparate pieces of information into a unified whole. It's still a mystery. Your inner world is vast. The scenarios you imagine, the conversations you rehearse, the memories you replay, all of this is a kind of parallel universe. You spend a significant portion of your life inside your own head. That's not wasted time. That's where your sense of self is constructed and renewed. Imagination is how you escape the present, but also how you engage with it more deeply. You imagine what someone else is feeling. You imagine how a situation might unfold. You imagine solutions to problems. Imagination isn't opposed to reality. It's a tool for navigating reality more skillfully. And that is enough. Thank you for spending this time here, exploring the quiet wonders of creativity and imagination. You've wandered through the hidden processes of your own mind tonight, the ways it builds worlds from nothing, the ways it connects ideas that seemed unrelated, the ways it dreams, quietly, even when you're awake. Some of these ideas will stay with you. Others will fade by morning. Both are fine. Both are part of the process. Your mind knows what to keep and what to let go. As you drift towards sleep tonight, know that your imagination is still working. It doesn't stop when you close your eyes. It doesn't rest when you do. Right now, even as you settle into stillness, your brain is making connections you won't notice until tomorrow. It's solving problems you've forgotten you had. It's taking the fragments of today, the conversations, the moments, the fleeting thoughts, and weaving them into something new, something that will surface when you need it most. This is what your mind does in the dark. It reorganizes. It consolidates. It finds patterns in the noise. The creative breakthroughs you'll have tomorrow are being prepared right now, in the quiet hours, while you sleep. Your unconscious mind is working through puzzles your waking mind couldn't solve. It's testing combinations, exploring possibilities, building bridges between ideas that seem too far apart. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to try. You don't have to remember. You don't have to force anything into being. The work is happening without your effort. Your only job now is to rest, to let go, to trust that your mind knows what it's doing, even when you're not paying attention. Creativity doesn't demand vigilance. It doesn't require you to stay awake, striving, pushing. Sometimes the most creative thing you can do is nothing at all. Just be still. Just breathe. Just let the day dissolve into the night. Your imagination has been your companion tonight. It's shown you how ideas are born, how they grow, how they connect. It's reminded you that you are always creating, always imagining, always building something new, even when you don't realize it. This capacity doesn't leave you. It's woven into the fabric of who you are. As you sink deeper into rest, let yourself feel grateful for this ability, for the quiet gift of a mind that wanders, that wonders, that makes meaning out of chaos. Not everyone pauses to notice it. Not everyone takes the time to explore the landscapes inside their own thoughts. But you did. Tonight, you listened. You were curious. You opened yourself to the mystery of how your own mind works. And now, it's time to let that mind do what it does best. Let it drift. Let it play. Let it roam through the strange terrain of dreams, where logic bends and impossibilities become real. This is where your deepest creativity lives. In the hours when you're not trying to control anything, when you're not steering the narrative, when you're simply allowing your brain to be what it is, a meaning-making machine that never stops working. Tomorrow, you might wake with an idea you didn't have before, or a solution to something that's been troubling you, or simply a feeling of clarity, a sense that something has shifted. You might not even notice it consciously, but it will be there. A small gift from the night, delivered while you slept. So rest now. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Trust that creativity doesn't abandon you when you close your eyes. It goes deeper. It works in the shadows. It prepares the ground for what's coming next. You've done enough for today. You've thought enough. You've wondered enough. Now it's time to stop, to sink, to dissolve into the softness of sleep. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts become distant, like voices fading into the background. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to hold on. They'll come back if they're important. And if they don't, that's okay too. Your mind is vast, infinite, always creating, always imagining, always dreaming. You can trust it to keep going, even when you're not watching. You can trust it to build worlds while you sleep, to explore possibilities you haven't considered, to make connections you couldn't see in daylight. This is the gift of rest. This is the gift of letting go. This is the gift of trusting that you are more than your waking thoughts, more than your conscious efforts. There is a deeper intelligence at work inside you, a quiet creativity that doesn't need applause or recognition. It simply is. And tonight, as you drift away, it will continue, making sense of the day, weaving memories into meaning, preparing insights you'll discover tomorrow, or next week, or months from now. The timeline doesn't matter. What matters is that the process never stops. You are always creating, even now, even here, even as you fade into sleep. So let go. Let your mind wander where it wants to go. Let it show you things you couldn't see with your eyes open. Let it surprise you. Let it take you somewhere strange and beautiful and entirely your own. You don't have to do anything. Just rest. Just be. Just allow. Good night.